Hello, everyone. So I am hopping over from talking about music to talk about film and television. I am following up on a video that I made last January, which I will link below, which was a ranking of every single movie that I saw for the first time in the previous calendar year. And so it was over 100 movies that I was ranking on the website Tiermaker, which, if you watch the video, you may recall it started to really glitch out. That was way too many files to be ranking in one template. So I actually have decided to do something differently this year, which will also make, I think, editing a lot easier. Because the images will be built into the website for me already instead of having to collect them myself. I am going to be using the movie rating and logging app Letterboxd to go through my history of films that I have watched in 2024 for the first time. Except this year, because of the fact that limited series are also logged on Letterboxd, because they are, at the end of the day, just really long movies that are just split up into parts. Limited series are going to be included this time. So all total, between the limited series, there's not that many, but there's a couple, and all of the movies, I have 154 projects that I am going to be talking about. Now, I want to clarify, this is very important. Not all of these projects came out within the 2024 calendar year. And as a matter of fact, at least 50%, if not more than 50% of these films came out in years previous. And the reason why I do it this way, instead of doing a standard 2024 ranked video, is because there are still way too many 2024 released films that I have yet to see. The real problem with being, first of all, broke and not being able to go to the movie theaters like 3 times a week, but also with just not being able to catch a lot of these international releases, a lot of these films that are in limited release right now and are not opening wide until the next calendar year. You can't really do a proper year-end list until months after the year is closed, because there's just so many movies that you can't necessarily have seen by January 1st of the following year. And so for that reason, I thought, why not just make these videos talking about everything I've seen? I've seen a lot of movies for the first time from years gone by. So we are going to be talking about movies new and old. I will say, though, most of the movies you will see on this list are going to be from 2024 and 2023. The 2023 stragglers are all of the movies that I would have loved to have seen before I made my 2023 ranking video. But as I said, they don't come out, maybe onto streaming services or even in wide release theatrical releases in the United States, which is where I live, until the following year, which makes it really hard to accurately and I think fairly judge what your favorite movies of the year are. So you will be seeing a lot of Oscar contenders from the last, which feel kind of passe at this point. I've actually kind of been thinking that instead of doing this just once a year in January, I might start doing this biannually. So that way I'll do it in June, or I'll do it in July, and I'll do it in January. To sort of recap the last 6 months, because I feel like when you're doing 12 months, first of all, some of the movies I don't remember as well. The ones I saw at the beginning of the year, particularly the ones I didn't think were that good, I don't really remember them very well. That's the problem when you watch a lot of movies. And so there is that issue. But also, they're just not as relevant. Like, is Poor Things really that relevant right now? No, we're all talking about The Substance. Well, guess what? I didn't see The Substance until 2025, so I can't put it on this video. I'm actually kind of annoyed because I just watched The Substance a couple of days ago, and I'm not going to be able to talk about it until presumably next January on this channel. And I was like, no, that's why we're doing the 6-month thing. I'll talk about it in July, because I can't wait that long. Besides, my thoughts are fresh now. But, I am going to be covering movies that I've seen up through New Year's Eve. So, it's recent, but not the very last 2 weeks, like the last week. I can't include. I've seen some movies that I really want to talk about, but they will have to be on the next video installment of this series. By the way, shout out to 2 films I did watch partially, but did not finish in 2024. Shout out to The Fall Guy and Spellbound. The former I watched on a plane, and to be fair, I probably would have finished if the plane hadn't landed while I was in the middle of the movie. But suffice to say, I didn't find the movie captivating enough to feel like finishing it on my return journey. And then Spellbound, I literally started it on Netflix and could not. My phone was like immediately in front of my eyes. It just could not grab my attention. Um, what can I say? It didn't have good reviews either. So, with all of that out of the way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop up here my Letterboxd account, which I will also link below if you'd like to follow me on here. I don't actually type out any reviews. I don't write reviews, but I do love to catalog and to rank and make lists. I love making lists. I love doing rankings if you know my channel. So I'm hopping over to my first time viewed in 2024 list, which explains what it is. And I'm going to go all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to view in carousel mode. I'm going to have this up on the screen here so you can see. We're already getting a spoiler of the first movie that I'm going to be talking about. We're going to be at the very bottom. And of course, that means we're going to be talking about the worst movie that I saw in 2024, which is, as you can see, The Ghosts of Borley Rectory. Now, this is a movie that I had to scratch my brain to even remember very much because I saw it earlier in the year with a friend. I have a friend who really likes to watch, especially horror movies, and particularly horror movies that are on like free services like Tubi. And so I see a lot. There's going to be a bunch of sort of like movies scattered throughout here that maybe I wouldn't have necessarily on my own chose to watch, even though I make sure it's something that I'm interested in too. It's just sometimes it's going to be a mixed bag of movies you're going to see here. I do like a good ghost story horror film, but this was definitely the lowest budget in the movie as far as I can recall ever seeing. The special effects were so slapdash and so corny. The story was absolutely, Julian Sands is actually a UK actor who recently passed away, which is really sad. He is way too talented to be involved in a project like this. There are some laugh out loud, special effects, costume stuff with the ghosts, and it's just, I don't know. If you want a really, really funny horror film that you can laugh at for how stupid it is, even though it is taking itself seriously, which makes it more painful, maybe I'd recommend it. I don't know if it's still on Tubi for free anymore. It is definitely not something I would recommend seeing. Okay, and then we're just going to keep moving on up to what the number one movie / limited series might be. And the limited series are going to be mixed in with all of these as if they were also movies. I mean, they're a little different because they're so long, but they still feel like movies, right? So this is actually called Haunted Hospital Hellstatten. It is a German found footage film from a few years ago. If anyone has seen Gonjiam Haunted Asylum out of South Korea, this is like a knockoff version of it that's not nearly as captivating, not nearly as good. A bunch of frat bros investigate a haunted asylum, and it didn't even have anything that scary. Like Gonjiam had some truly, truly frightening and disturbing moments that I just could not look away from the screen, even though I was petrified. This was just lame. It was just bad. It was just a knockoff. The characters, you just wanted them all to die. I mean, I have a soft spot for found footage horror films compared to the average critic, but this was one of the worst I've ever seen. Okay, completely different. Going to a Disney direct-to-DVD sequel from 2004, I believe. This is Atlantis: Milo's Return. This is a series of short films that was packaged together as a DVD release, as a proper sequel to the 2001 Atlantis film from Disney Animation. As a big fan of that original film, this is one of the most disappointing direct-to-DVD sequels for any of the Disney animated canon. And universally, I think everyone hates it. There's not even that much Atlantis in it. They spend very little time in the actual mythical land and all of their time on Earth, on the surface, doing these sort of investigations of ancient, creatures and technology that are running amok in ancient civilizations. And they try to tie it all together, but the three stories almost have nothing to do with each other. It was obviously going to be a TV series that was then last minute packaged together as a project, much like Moana 2. Although, unlike Moana 2, this is not, this is very clearly episodic, very clearly meant to be little shorts that were meant to be separate as a TV series. So I do not recommend it if you were interested in seeing it, but it was one of the few Disney direct-to-DVD sequels I never got around to seeing. I have a friend who really, really likes Medea movies, and don't get me wrong, I enjoy them too. We all like, junk food movies. Um, I, might have some of them higher on this list than because I saw quite a few this year. Oh boy, we're starting with the bottom of the barrel. But you know what? There is something about them that, like I said, they're good for what they are if you don't take them very seriously. There are a couple sequences I really love from this one. The trick or treating, set when they're, sitting on the lawn trick or treating with the trick or treaters. Outside of that, this was a very tepid, boring experience, I felt, for what it could have been, which was much more slapstick comedy. The last Cars movie I'd never seen was Cars 2. I saw Cars 3 for the first time in 2023. And so I'd seen Cars as a kid, never had seen Cars 2. It is, of course, infamous for being not only the worst Cars film, but one of the worst Pixar animated films. I think that, you go in with low expectations, you'll have a fine time with it. I do like the international, Grand Prix setting for all of these characters to sort of meet and mingle. I actually thought that was really interesting, but, as far as a Pixar level quality story, obviously this is not a movie that is Pixar's best foot being put forward. There's Someone Inside Your House this is about a serial killer, and I'm not usually a big into serial killers, so this was a little bit out of my comfort zone, but it wasn't too violent. A mysterious, serial killer killing a ton of people. And it's a big twist who it is. And there's this whole like investigative mystery behind it. If you like slashers, you'll enjoy it. But like I said, thankfully it wasn't too violent. It's not like something that, like The Strangers or something that I found really genuinely disturbing. Such Good People. I watched this with a friend. I would not have watched this on my own. Two gay guys house sit for someone who's out of town, and just they decide to find a way to steal all the money that they find there. It's like if I'm not, I don't know if I remember the premise that well. It was a little while ago I saw this movie. Michael Urie from Ugly Betty is in this. I haven't seen him in a ton of things since Ugly Betty. I was a huge Ugly Betty fan in high school. Yeah, a gay rom-com that is, I don't know. It's just so cringe. There's so much cringe about this movie. Sadako is a reboot of the Ring franchise from Japan. I didn't know these movies had come out until this year. I had seen the 2012 reboot of Sadako years ago, like in 2012, I think. This is sort of like an offshoot of the original Ringu storyline in the future, but it's kind of in its own universe. It's about another little girl who is reincarnating herself, who could be a reincarnation of the infamous Sadako. If you've seen the Ring films, Samara is the American version of this character. I love Japanese horror films, particularly the Ringu, the Ring and the Grudge films, the Ju-on Ringu films, and the spin-offs they're perfectly fun and fine, but absolutely nothing to phone home about. This was definitely one of the worst Ring variants I have ever seen. One Missed Call 2 is another Japanese. It's called Chakushin Ari. I've seen the first one, so I didn't I saw both 1 and 2 in 2024. However, I believe I did see 1 back in high school, so that's why I didn't log it in this list, because it's not technically my first time seeing it. But I had thought I'd seen 2, but then I watched it and none of it seemed familiar. So I was like, maybe I did watch it in high school 15 years ago, but I don't remember it well enough to confidently say that it was my second time watching it. So I logged it in as the first. It is nowhere near as good as the first film. It really bungles the whole lore of the first film, tries to introduce another antagonist that conflicts with the antagonist from the first film. There's another ghost girl, and the story is just so convoluted, it just falls over itself. And it doesn't know when to end. It's just not, it's very disappointing, to be honest with you. Because as much as the One Missed Calls are almost considered one of the worst Japanese horror franchises to come out of Japan, I still really enjoyed them as a concept. So once again, we've got a Medea movie. This is one of the more recent ones. It's a funeral, the capers that you might expect from it. A bitter balance of slapstick and drama. There's some Medea movies that are a little too melodrama and not enough slapstick, and it's like, this is supposed to be a Medea movie. This one was a little better balanced. All right, we finally get a slightly more prestigious film on this list, although it is still only, as you can see, you'll see it, by the way, at the bottom, you'll be able to see how many stars I rated these films. I still only gave it 2 stars, which is Golda. So this is a story about the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir. She was in the 70s Prime Minister of Israel during the Yom Kippur War, where she has to make some very difficult decisions in regard to protecting Israel from, I believe, at this time, Egypt. And so, look, I'm not going to get too into the weeds about the whole political discourse that I think this film came out last year. It did get an Oscar nomination for makeup and hairstyling, mainly because Helen Mirren caked on a ton of prosthetic. It was a transformative biopic piece, which the Oscars love. I always am interested in seeing historical figures, played by an iconic actor or actress. So I will always watch these movies with my parents. But this was definitely, the reviews I had seen, I was like, I totally get why no one's buying this film. It also doesn't help that, Golda Meir, it's a little whitewashed, with the current conflict that is going on in Israel and Palestine. I mean, this movie was obviously not meant to comment on that. It was not meant to come out to make a political statement in either direction. It was just bad timing for the movie to release just a month in theaters before October 7th. So that was unfortunate. But it is a film that if you are of the more Zionist persuasion, you are going to root for the protagonist. And if you have a little bit of a ick in you from the last couple, over a year of conflict or years of conflict that has been going on, and especially the Israeli government today, it muddies the waters that this film is trying to engage in. I'll be very interested to see how I feel about September 5, which is a newer movie that tackles a similar historical Israeli conflict. The Wretched, this is another horror film I saw with my friend that I cannot distinguish too well. There was a little bit more of a creature feature aspect to this one, if I do recall. There is a witch in the woods, and I'm always intrigued by, the folklore, the folk horror type of movies that involve, pagan ritual and skeletons and circles and things like that in the forest. And this movie's got a bit of that. But it's very much a teen drama. It's like, I don't know. It was a little Teen Wolfy. It felt a little bit like a Teen Wolf, like a CW show. Mean Girls. We have the remake of Mean Girls. I watched this on a plane this year. This is definitely an airplane movie. It is not good. It is not good. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the original film, only because I just think it's things that are so overhyped. I tend to kind of go, are we overhyping this maybe a little bit? Renee Rapp is excellently cast, but I do feel like she's just not fully punching the way she should. She doesn't hit through. She doesn't stand out the way I feel like. The way the movie is concocted as a musical, I don't hate that. It was a Broadway show, and I like that Tina Fey is back. I think Tina Fey and John Hamm, some of the best parts of the movie. But I don't know. I like Devantika as well. I actually kind of like that Halloween song. I have it on my phone. I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of catchy. It's so vapid, but it's her character, And then I think Is this the? No, I think we got one more Medea movie on this list. Maybe this is the last one. We've got Medea's Witness Protection. I actually really do not remember. Um, oh, this is the one where a white family has to move in with Medea, and there's a bit of the dynamic of a sort of lily white suburbs family that comes from somewhat like high background, living in Medea's house. I mean, there's a lot to be mined there comedically, and I do think for the most part it does a good job at being entertaining. We have our first limited series. This was on Netflix, The Perfect Couple. This was a Nicole Kidman. Everyone made fun of her wigs. Everyone, you know what? I didn't think Nicole Kidman was as bad as as everyone says. And I thought it was a perfectly enjoyable whodunit, in Nantucket with all these rich, waspy type people who you love to hate. I don't know. I actually really liked the Irish accent actress. I forget her name, who played one of the protagonists, and plus Megan Fahey. She does a good job. I it it's fine. I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to watch it, but if you like whodunit mysteries that are a little White Lotusy, but not as good, I'd check it out. Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs. This is the 2009 one, so I guess this is only the third Ice Age. I'd only ever seen one and two, and then maybe I did watch this one on a plane back in like high school. I know I watched a Ice Age movie on a plane once when I was a teenager, but I think it was this one. But because I didn't remember it well enough, I just logged it as a first time view for because I actually sat down and watched it. I don't know why I did. I thought, well, let's give. I loved Ice Age as a kid, but it was only the first and the second. Those were the only, whatever comes after is just a mess. And this one, it's just, you can see the minionization, the illuminationization of the Ice Age franchise begin with this movie. Jurassic World, speaking of sequels that didn't live up to the original, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom is from 2018. I have not seen Dominion, which is the 2022 follow-up. I do not plan to. I've heard it is even worse. I actually, because I went into Fallen Kingdom with such low expectations, enjoyed it a little bit more than I thought I was going to. I really do like the Jurassic World movies. I like the 2015 Jurassic World. I will defend that movie against naysayers. I thought that was a really good reboot. And I thought this was okay. I would have seen it in theaters if I cared at the time. It was not terrible. I did feel like it was the end of the story, though. I was like, we don't need to go any further here. I'll be very interested to see what the new Jurassic World movie this year is going to be like. I really hope it is a step up in quality. Hocus Pocus 2. This came out 2 years ago, and it made me watch the original Hocus Pocus for the first time. I know. I only saw Hocus Pocus for the first time 2 years ago. But I decided not to watch the sequel until this Halloween. And yeah, it's not. If you're not into Hocus Pocus, you're just not into it. I feel like there's two camps. For people who have the nostalgia for it, it's just always, I've got, Stuart Little was kind of like my nostalgia bad movie, okay? I will defend the Stuart Little movies because they're so important to my childhood. I don't have that with Hocus Pocus. So when I watch it as an adult, I'm like, yeah, I love the actresses. They're great in the roles, but it's so childish and I'm just not interested. Not interested in like a very, very children's focused witchcraft story. It's just not really that interesting to me. And obviously I do think this was worse than the original. I mean, that's very rare that it isn't. But it was an enjoyable enough time to for what it was, because it didn't go out in theaters. This is the Christmas special from last year, Doctor Who: The Church on Ruby Road. The reason why I have a Doctor Who episode on here is because it was like a mini movie, because it was a standalone Christmas special. I have not seen the Christmas special yet from this past Christmas, but this introduced the character of Ruby Sunday. I have seen the latest season of Doctor Who that aired in the spring. I will say the season gets better as it goes along. The first couple episodes are rough. And the Christmas special is a little better than the first couple episodes of the proper season. And I do love Nkuti. I think he is brilliant as the Doctor. And I do love the actress who plays Ruby Sunday. I can't remember her name at the moment. But the overarching story leaves a lot to be desired about Ruby and her heritage. I feel like the best episodes are sort of just a few in the center of the season. There's a couple, that are just really great mini explorations of a certain concept or theme that are just brilliant. Okay, so we finally have something that I've actually filmed a review for on this channel this year. And it, weirdly enough, was one of my most successful videos of 2024. Jennifer Lopez, This Is Me Now. This was an album that was also a film on Amazon Prime. I actually had this ranked a lot lower initially, but when I was going back and like fixing up this list, I realized this is not worse than Mean Girls. I did have it as my worst film of 2024 for a long time, and I had it actually below Mean Girls 2024. But I've decided now to put it above even The Perfect Couple, which was also a 2024 release. I thought that I have to respect the creativity. What Jennifer was trying to do, it's balls to the wall, it's hit or miss, and I appreciate the kind of unbridled artistry that she is allowing herself to express her story in. And I actually think the album is pretty, solid for a J-Lo record. And so, I don't know, obviously it gets really panned. I think on Letterboxd it has a 1 point something. It's really, really hated upon. But I give it a couple points for how audacious it is, the choreography and some of the sets and things like that. How to Be Single is a Rebel Wilson comedy from 2016. I saw it with a friend. It is a date night movie that has Dakota Johnson in the main role. It's a movie that you want to be funnier than it is. The movie starts to really drag. Again, something like with the Medea movies, with the melodrama getting too in the way of the actual comedy, it starts to be a problem. There's another Rebel Wilson comedy that I vastly prefer that you will see higher up on this list that I saw this year. So, Sadako 2 3D is a 2013 Japanese sequel to 2012's Sadako. I had seen 2012 Sadako years ago, and I did rewatch it this year, but I can't log it in this list because I've already seen it. But I'd never seen Sadako 3D 2. Sadako 3D 2 is basically a reinterpretation of Spiral, which was a 1998 movie from a 1990 something book written by the author of the Ringu book. And I did enjoy this obviously more than the 2019 film. There are some interesting sequences. It's the whole kind of like reincarnating Samara Sadako kind of storyline again. Again, it goes in a different direction from the Ring universe of the first couple films in Japan or even in the United States. I recommend this. I mean, I love how Japanese horror can get so art house, and this film does some things that I thought were visually very interesting. The characters and the story was kind of one note, but I thought it was really interesting, especially in the end, how there's just some striking visuals that I can't get out of my head. Okay, Five Nights at Freddy's. This is the Halloween horror movie of 2023. I really did not get this movie. After watching it, I was just like, yikes, this is not at all. And, I didn't necessarily want to watch a movie that was going to be extremely gruesome and, terrifying to watch. I am not going to watch like a Terrifier movie for that reason. So my critique isn't necessarily that it was too tame. I just felt like the story was too cerebral for a movie about animatronic bunnies and bears. I don't know. I mean, I'm going to sound brain dead, but I had a hard time following the emotional journey that this character was going on. And I did see it at the beginning of the year, so I'm having a little bit of a hard time remembering exactly what happens with Josh Hutcherson's character. But this was trying to be a really deep story that was disguised and wrapped in a Five Nights at Freddy's Chainsaw Massacre cosplay. And at the end of the day, I think we all just wanted something that was a little bit more of a popcorn movie. And I'd be very interested to see how the sequel fares in the critical department, because I know this was a very hit or miss movie with critics. WE is a film directed by Madonna, and I thought for years I should finally see this movie. It's been on my list, so I finally watched it this year. It's about Wallace Simpson, who married the Duke of Windsor, Edward VIII. His real name was David, but he chose the name of Edward for his coronation. Um, but the movie wasn't solely about Wallace Simpson and David Windsor. It was also a lot about this Wally Winthrop, this heiress who's in the 90s going through an auction of Wallace Simpson's stuff in New York City, and dealing with her own uh, infertility issues, relationship drama. And so she's sort of flashing back and forth, kind of channeling Wallace Simpson. And there's a point where the two of them meet. All of the critics praise Andrea Riseborough for being the heart of this movie. Her performance as Wallace Simpson is magnetizing. I love all of the flashbacks to the 1940s and 1930s when, in the late 20s and 30s when their romance was blooming. Um, but the modern day part of it just really took me out of the film. It was very much a slog. Also, Madonna, she really over edits her films. There are a lot of shots that are a little too, the cuts are too jumpy, the shakiness of the camera. There's a scene where she's giving herself IVF, and it is edited like the most rock star punk rock, car chase scene with like such dramatic editing that it's just so over the top. I'm just like, I don't know. Sometimes you got to tone it back. Speaking of the Ring films, we've got Ring 2. This is from 1999. This was the sequel, the proper sequel to the first Ring film in Japan. I had seen Ring 1 way back when. I thought I had seen Ring 2. When I watched it, I didn't really remember much of it. So for that reason, I logged it as a first-time watch. Maybe I did see it, like I said, back in high school. I went through a, Japanese horror phase back then. Ring 2 is not as good as Ring 1, but it continues the story of Ring 1 pretty much right from where that one leaves off. The interesting thing, however, is that it is not like the Ring 2 in the United States. The Ring 2 is, in the United States, a conglomeration of elements from both Japanese Ring films that had already been released at that point. So there are similarities, but the stories differ. Okay. If you recall my 2023 video, I was going through Marvel movies. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. I really have been getting into Agatha all along and the witch side of the MCU. I do want to go back and watch WandaVision. I don't know if I ever will. This was coming after WandaVision, and Wanda's character is so important in this. And I know a lot of people don't like how she was handled in this film. I was kind of just looking for the visuals. I wasn't really that engaged. I mean, I thought the story was engaging enough. She wants to find her children, but she turns into this psychopath in doing so, which I do feel like, I don't like when one of the strongest, in my opinion, best female characters of a very macho franchise is demonized like that. It just doesn't rub me the right way. But, a lot of people had a lot of mixed feelings on this film. It's very stylized, though. It's very kind of distinct, got a bit of a horror lens to it, and that's from Sam Raimi, the director. Kung Fu Panda 4, talk about a sequel we wanted, but we knew it was going to be terrible. Kung Fu Panda 4 is a hollow shell of what the Kung Fu Panda movies were. It doesn't have a lot of the sidekicks, what are they, the Fantastic Five? I thought it was okay for, again, a popcorn movie, but leaves so much to be desired. DreamWorks, you're so high and so low, go back and forth so much. Despicable Me 3, I've seen the first 2 Despicable Me's already, but I didn't see Despicable Me 3 until this year. I will see Despicable Me 4. I love the first 2 Despicable Me's. I think they're just really fun and campy. The third one was obviously the letdown for me. It's still, again, I don't really remember what happened in it. It's the one where he has the long lost brother. Yeah, it's just fun family movie. That's all I can say. Beetlejuice. I'm surprised I even saw this movie. I have never seen the original Beetlejuice, and yet I saw Beetlejuice this year. Yeah, that's because my friend took me to see it at the theater. I had a good time with it. They gave me a little bit of a crash course on Beetlejuice. There were some interesting set pieces, costumes are definitely. I love the look of the house draped in black. I think it's in mourning. I would love to do that when I move out of this house. I'd be like, the house is in mourning. Just drape it in black. So yeah, there's some great visuals to this movie. But it ultimately didn't do that much for me. I was never that drawn to seeing Beetlejuice to begin with. Tim Burton is not really. I mean, I love a few things he's done, and then a lot of it is just a little. I don't want to say tacky, but yeah, I don't know. It's just not for me. It's just not for me. The Boogeyman. This was a 2023 horror film about a girl who is afraid of the dark. This is sort of relatable. There's, in fact, one scene where the girl is at some sort of cognitive behavioral therapy, and they are trying to train her to get used to the dark by turning the lights off and on at different intervals. And it just reminded me of when I was having night terrors when I was in third grade. It was very real in that regard. But really, this is a poor man's Babadook. If you don't know, The Babadook is an Australian horror film from 10 years ago. Just watch that film. It is a way better ghost in the closet kind of movie. This was definitely a letdown for the premise. The Watchers was a movie I was so interested in, even though the reviews weren't looking good. M. Night Shyamalan's daughter directed this. It's her directorial debut. And it's about a group of people in Ireland who find themselves in a forest, and then they're in this, like, building where they can see out, but it's a one-way mirror, so they can, be watched, but they can't see who's watching them. And they are wondering who is watching them. They know they can't escape, and they have to abide by certain rules. So it's a premise that I thought was extremely interesting. I really wanted to, when I saw the trailer, know more about it. After having seen it, I'm a little let down. Obviously, I saw the reviews ahead of time. I was like, don't go in expecting something great here. The twist was very predictable. Definitely a child of M. Night Shyamalan with, I think Ishana is her name. Yeah, she is definitely a student of her father. But I don't know. I love Dakota Fanning. So this movie was always going to resonate a little more with me. Especially because I said I like folk horror, and this leads into that, but it doesn't do it in a way that I found satisfying. Um, Twisters. People are probably going to be shook that I have this so low. I really want natural disaster movies to make a comeback in Hollywood. I don't know why that they have taken such a back seat. I feel like the last big, like, huge blockbuster disaster movie was 2012, back in 2009. We've gotten a handful that have done okay at the box office since then, like San Andreas. But I this is like going to the Roland Emmerich School of Blockbuster, and of course, Twister from 1996, which I have seen, but a long time ago when I was a kid. I need to rewatch it. But for me, okay, where you lose me is the over-reliance on country music. I can't remember if the first film had so much country. I think it was a little more rock and roll. This was such a countryfied version that, I mean, Glenn Powell and the souped-up SUV with the country soundtrack constantly playing. It was just like so. I don't know. I watched this movie not long after the 2024 election. And it just is that it was like at a time where I was just not really feeling America, especially like a certain heartland of America that's like very, very much MAGA country. And I couldn't stop thinking about that watching it. So it's probably a bad time for me to watch this movie. Um, But given that on its own, I mean, obviously the moments I was engaged were the moments when they were dealing with tornadoes. There were some cool, tornado porn stuff going on. I don't know. There was some disaster stuff that was gripping. Everything else, just especially after the first half, the relationship dynamic between Glenn Powell and the female protagonist. I didn't care. I didn't care. It was really hard to take the movie seriously. And I kind of want a disaster movie to take itself a little more seriously. I do want to say there was some elements to the cinematography I enjoyed, the way the landscapes were shot. Um, and the soundtrack, when it was not country music, there was a softness to it, and that's because the director of this also directed Minari, which was a beautifully soft and gentle Oscar bait movie. So I found it very interesting that then this director, this Asian director, went in this direction for it, and honky tonked the film up. But I was actually expecting it to be even more aggressively honky tonk, and I was a little bit like, there's some like gorgeous piano instrumental with Wheatfield cinematography here. I'm like kind of vibing with it. Okay. Gosh, I really don't remember watching this. I guess I watched the 2015 SpongeBob movie. I love a lot of the SpongeBob movies, even if they're really bad. This one was not as good as obviously some of its predecessors. It was the first one to use this sort of more stop motion kind of looking animation. I mean, it wasn't stop motion, it was animated, but it looked a little more lifelike than like hand-drawn cartoon. Harry Price Ghost Hunter. This is another movie that is sort of in the Ghost of Borley Rectory kind of oeuvre. But it was much better, but it was very boring. I wanted so much more out of this. I wanted it to be spookier, more mysterious. It was just a very run-of-the-mill ghost hunter goes to a house to investigate a haunting. Of course, they think the woman is paranoid and making it all up. There's like a lot of good old early 20th century British patriarchy thrown in. But I don't know. It just didn't land. I didn't expect much from it though. 2018's The Grinch. I had never seen it. Very colorful, whimsical animation, but doesn't hold a candle to the Jim Carrey version. I'm sorry. I know some people like it. For me, it just didn't hold a candle. Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget was the newest Aardman film that, of course, is before Wallace and Gromit came this year. This came last year. I actually, again, went in with such low expectations that I had a good time with it. It's still not a very well-made movie, and I don't even remember being that into Chicken Run. I need to rewatch that. It's been a long time. But yeah, it's enjoyable. Like, it was a fun caper. Neighbors. This is the Seth Rogen, Zac Efron comedy from 10 years ago. Very raunchy, very, devil may care. I mean, for what it is, it's an enjoyable experience. If you want like a frat boy living next to a young new couple with baby type dynamic movie, the tension is kind of fun, that the way they play it off of each other. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is a Marvel movie from 2021. Obviously, I liked it more than Doctor Strange. That's all I'm going to say about it. I really would love to see more of the Asian style, the Asian corner of the MCU expanded. So I would really like to see more of Shang-Chi. When are we going to get a sequel? Who knows? But it was enjoyable for what it was. The movie was a little hit or miss at points, but I enjoyed it for what it was. Princess Diaries 2, perfectly safe sequel. Julie Andrews, Anne Hathaway play off of each other so well. This was the one with Chris Pine. It was very standard Disney 2000s movie fare. I don't know what else to say. Again, do not have nostalgia for the Princess Diaries movies. I have only seen them recently for the first time. Another limited series, Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey? I recently watched this. A very disturbing look at the JonBenet Ramsey murder. I didn't know very much about it, so it was very informative for that. I didn't know about like all of the investigation, how it took so long. I knew they'd never found the killer, but I didn't know all the details about the murder, about the way the family was framed. I mean, so much of this, I just wasn't paying attention at the time because I was so young. What a tragic story. Didn't answer any questions, of course, for those who's followed the case, but it was a good summation and update of the story today. The father is heavily interviewed in it. Very disturbing, though. Be careful when you watch it. You're going to see and hear some very disturbing, descriptions of things. My parents overheard me watching it, and they were like, "We're very disturbed by what you're watching." It's very dark, very dark. The Miracle Club. This is a perfectly safe and forgettable British lady movie that I would watch with my parents. Like, it's 100% a movie that was made for me, my mom, and dad. But what, of course, makes this movie so significant, unfortunately, in hindsight, is the fact this is Maggie Smith's final movie role. This came out in 2023, and of course, tragically, we lost Dame Maggie Smith this past year. I saw this movie before she passed away, so I mean, I guess I'm glad I did, but it would have been extra poignant if I had seen it more recently. Um, Laura Linney and Kathy Bates are in this. It's about a group of women who go to Lourdes, which is this, mecca for Catholics in France, for like this baptism. It's a story that is feels like an autobiographical story, but I think it's fiction. And it's a family drama kind of movie. It was perfectly fine for, like I said, that kind of watch with your parents, especially if you love, BBC British production kind of movies. Trap. This was M. Night Shyamalan's movie this year. He is a Philly native. I live in Philly, and there were a lot of shots I recognized, but unfortunately, most of this movie was filmed in Toronto, even though it was supposed to be in Philadelphia. Really wish he'd actually gone to film this in Philadelphia, like his other films, but it is what it is. I'd heard mixed things about this. It's a preposterous story. It's a movie that's drawn on way too long. But I was kind of glued to the screen. That's all I'm going to say. Although at the end, I did start to kind of go like, this is just. At the end, you start to really kind of realize that what M. Night's doing is just trying to out preposter himself. I know that's not a word, but he's trying to make the story as preposterous as he can. Each turn this story takes, it just gets more absurd. Oh, Queen Bees. I think this was on Netflix. Ellen Burstyn and the late James Caan. This is from a couple years ago. I love retirement home caper movies. There was one really good one this year. This one was just, if it reminds you of Palms with Diane Keaton from a couple years ago, it's a similar type of film. Perfectly safe, sweet, romantic comedy about two elders finding love late in life. It's a bit Mean Girls in a retirement home as well. It's got a bit of that energy. Suzume. This is by the director of Your Name, a film I really enjoyed, Makoto Shinkai. I gotta be honest with you, I felt like this film was all style and no substance. I did appreciate, the mythology of the story of how earthquakes in Japan have been mythologized in this universe to be represented by this creature that comes out of this dimensional portal. And the main character has to find a way to shut this creature away again after it's been opened. And there's a lot of like emotionally tear-jerking kind of moments. It's so beautiful as an anime, but I was just left feeling like I wanted to see this movie just focus in a little bit more on its ideas. I felt like it expanded out to so many different ideas that didn't come together. I don't know. I was into the fantasy, but I was also somehow pulled out of it because it was so ill-explained. I was having a hard time getting into the fantasy of it. There's an anthropomorphized chair that like is one of the protagonists. I mean, it's very absurd. The story is very bizarre. The Sister Act 2 is the sequel to the iconic Whoopi Goldberg Sister Act. Saw it this year. Really fun film. You will see the first Sister Act, but it is way higher up. I believe Sister Act 2 is the one with Lauryn Hill. I had no idea that Lauryn Hill was in these movies. Really cool to see her in like those early days of her in the Fugees coming to her musical stardom. Queen Pins. This is a Kristen Bell comedy and it's based on a real story about a woman who scams all of these major corporations by sending letters to get free coupons for complaint letters she writes to all of these companies saying, I didn't like the product I bought. And then she sells them, third party by using a supplier in Mexico who has them taken from the place they're printed out. It's like, Narcos for coupons, basically. It gets really intense. BB Rexa appears in it as it's a very like sleuthy kind of movie, and you see how far they can take this enterprise that they make so much money off of before it crashes and burns and they get caught by the feds. And there is this kind of buddy cop duo of Bruce Willis and another character who are trying to track them down. They're very funny in the film. They're very like centered to the story. It's really interesting to see them try and uncover the truth about what's going on with these coupons, because the companies are calling them up saying, we're losing all this money. What's going on? Where are these coupons coming from? All right, so I'm actually going to talk about two Prince Andrew royal family scandal projects. So first we've got Scoop, which was on Netflix this year with Gillian Anderson. This is a dramatization of the interview, the infamous interview, where Prince Andrew completely bungles the questions about his connections to Jeffrey Epstein in 2019. Once Jeffrey Epstein has committed suicide and there are renewed investigations into sex trafficking that Andrew may or may not have known about or even taken part in. The allegations of Virginia Giuffre are included in this. It's a retelling of that story. There is a better Amazon short series that dives into it called A Very Royal Scandal. And it's a couple episodes that actually take you beyond the interview, unlike the Gillian Anderson one, and shows Prince Andrew's fallout in the royal family. As someone who loves The Crown and loves drama about the royal family, this felt like a continuation of that. So I was very interested, even though it was very soapy and it wasn't that well prestige. It wasn't like a prestige adaptation like The Crown is. But it was a serviceable drama that dramatized very real events and getting a peek behind the curtain at the absolute shit show that unfolded because of Andrew. And, I have never thought very highly of that man. Boy, these two series, I think A Very Royal Scandal is slightly more sympathetic to him. Scoop is extremely asympathetic, but both are very unsympathetic to Andrew. And both have a very big, focus on spotlighting, victims of such horrific sex crimes. And Billie Piper is in Scoop, by the way. So it was really cool to see her in something again. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, so that was cool. A Simple Favor, 2018, Blake Lively, Anna Kendrick, comedy thriller. Blake Lively is obviously very controversial right now. I'm not going to get into it because, oh boy, that's a whole thing. But I haven't actually seen her in very many movies before. So this was one of my first Blake Lively projects, and I'd heard good things about it. It is absurd and it's kind of ridiculous, but that's what you want from the kind of wine mom movie that this is. This is, wine moms go bad. I don't know. I mean, they're both divas, and you just see them having diva offs the whole movie. Henry Golding is in there as well. It's a very sexual movie, but it was so, I don't want to say it was clever, but it kept me on my toes. I enjoyed it. Isn't It Romantic? I just want to shout out is the Rebel Wilson rom-com that I thought was significantly better. It's the one where she hits her head and realizes she's in a rom-com, and everything is made for laughs about that. It's just a really fun idea that she has a great time with. Easy A. I'm not a huge fan of this film. I had a friend who was obsessed with it. I didn't grow up with it. I just saw it for the first time this year. It's a film that I'm just kind of like, okay. Okay. It wasn't that funny, but also didn't have drama that was that memorable. So I can't even really remember what happened or what the conflict was beyond the little blurb. This is the one with one of the Allie and AJ sisters in it. I don't know. It just didn't do that much for me. Carry On, a Netflix movie that was probably way more fun than it should have been. It is corny. Like I said, it's a good, stupid popcorn movie. I'd never looked at Taron Egerton as such a compelling action star before, but he really is. And there's something about airports and the frenetic energy of an airport that this movie really capitalizes on, even though so much of it is so preposterous. There are so many points in the movie where the airport is absolutely deserted when it should not be. There are so many plot holes to this movie, but if you don't think about it too much, you'll have a good time. Okay, we have one of the first big awards films of the year. Well, what was supposed to be a big awards film of the year that I am extremely disappointed in. This is probably the first movie on this list that is such a crushing disappointment. I was so excited when I heard about this film. This is Steve McQueen, who did 12 Years a Slave. Saoirse Ronan, World War II Blitz drama. I defend The Darkest Hour. I know a lot of people don't like that it won, Best Actor for Gary Oldman, even though I think it was a great movie. I love movies about World War II that are like very dramatic, because it's just such a horrendous time in our recent history that's just so interesting to see explored. There were, of course, elements of this that I was expecting to be riveting. Like there's a moment in the tubes, the underground tunnels, where they're having to escape water flooding. The set pieces, the production design, it's all very lavish, it's all very big budget. But then the actual story itself is all over the place. The characters are thrown in and taken out, and the tone of the movie is at once a very serious study of a woman and her child in the Blitz, and then it's kind of a Charles Dickens caper. The characters that he meets are very larger than life, but also unrealistic. Harris Dickinson has a very pointless role in the film. He just appears briefly as a firefighter, I believe. I don't know. It's a lot of Saoirse Ronan running around looking for her boy. Where's my boy? It just is a shame. It could have been so much more, and it looks like it's going to be completely shut out at the Oscars. It's really sad to say, but it is looking like it is not going to get anything. So this was definitely a flop. Okay, talk about a movie that was a flop, but I really enjoyed. My mom really enjoyed. I love Bob Ross. He is such a campy character. This is an Owen Wilson comedy parodying a character that is like Bob Ross. It's obviously not meant to be Bob Ross, but it is meant to be Bob Ross. He invents a character that's like him, and it is just such a funny joke that is at the expense of every single sort of like NPR listening New England liberal. Like, it's a very much movie for my parents that they could laugh at themselves, and because they're artists. My mom's an artist, and this is an NPR program that he's working on, and she loves NPR. I mean, it was a match made in heaven for like a comedy that my family would really enjoy. I think that if you're not into kind of that sort of humor, there's a little bit of a Portlandia. If anyone likes Portlandia, there's a little bit of a Portlandia sketch quality to this film. But I get why the reviews weren't that great, but I thought Owen Wilson was maybe not the best compelling actor for the movie, but I enjoyed it. Spy. This is a Melissa McCarthy, Paul Feig movie. There are a bunch of those. Yeah, I don't know. One of the better ones, but kind of forgettable. She has to go undercover and take over for someone who is in a high stakes spy thriller setting. Jean du Barry. This is a French film with Johnny Depp. It was this big comeback. It's very controversial because of it. I'm going to be honest with you. This movie is a little overhated on Letterboxd. I feel mainly probably because of Johnny Depp, and he is a very one-note flat actor, and this performance is not memorable for him at all. But the cinematography, the costumes, as someone who loves seeing, the 18th century Versailles lavishness on display, I couldn't look away. I couldn't look away from, I love seeing the pretentiousness of that world. And if you've seen Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, you know what I'm talking about. This is obviously not quite as captivating of a film as that, or as clever, but an interesting story that I didn't know a ton about, the mistress of this king, the second to last ever king of France. Anyone But You, Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney are better than they should be in this rom-com. I don't know what else to tell you. The perfect date movie. No date movie is better concocted. Um, I don't know. Perfectly middle of the road. You can have a good time with it. You can laugh, but the drama isn't like too roll your eyes. It's got eye candy. It's got everything you could want. But speaking of a comedy that I wanted a little more from, I thought that Bottoms was a very smart comedy and obviously very much aimed for LGBT, particularly the L in the LGBT. This is a lesbian comedy. And I'm not a lesbian, so maybe I could have appreciated it more if I was. But, maybe it's just what bugged me a little bit was how the male antagonist characters were portrayed. I mean, they're supposed to be the straight jocks, but they're dancing to music that no straight jock would ever dance to. They're performing in a way and presenting themselves in a way that is very coded as homosexual, which is so conflicting with the story where they're supposed to be straight. And I just want them to be gay. And I hate when like there's a little bit of that. I don't want to say it's queer baiting, but it's like the director and the writers wanted to like dangle, Nicholas Galitzine being a gay character without him actually being gay. And I hate that because I'm already a little bit sussed out by him in real life because he constantly takes gay roles, but he's supposedly straight in real life. And it's just like, I want you to be gay. I want you to be gay. Anywho, it was a fine movie, very over the top, very unrealistic. Like at the end, there is so much carnage on a football field that literally no one in the stands intervenes to stop. They all just sit and watch. And it's like, where are all the adults? Where are all the faculty in this school? Where is law enforcement? Like, this just movie is in its own universe. It doesn't make any sense. Migration. This was a very silly, fun family Illumination movie that was way better than the Illumination in front of it would lead you to believe. Put this on if you have Peacock. You will have a good time. It's feel good, beautiful animation, great animated animal comedy. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. I was really pleasantly surprised by this one. But speaking of a classic animated film I had not seen until this year, Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest. Yeah, I think my placement of it speaks for itself. It's kind of a slog to get through as an adult because the animation is so dated. But there is some interesting kind of parallels that can be drawn to other movies that are very not much knocking it off, like Avatar. So it was interesting to see the blueprint. Fern Gully. This was before Pocahontas, before Avatar. So it's definitely a classic animated film from the 90s that didn't come from a major animation studio. Black Panther Wakanda Forever. This movie should have been better than it was. It's trying to do a lot of things, and I feel like it doesn't give a lot of the characters enough central focus. I saw Black Panther on an airplane years ago. I probably should rewatch it, but it had been a long time. But obviously, this was made after Chadwick Boseman's death, so it's a eulogy to him. And the moments that are celebrating that are beautiful. And Angela Bassett, she did the thing. I will say that she did the thing. Yeah, I mean, I love the music, the soundtrack to this film. There's some incorporated into the pop music incorporated into the movie. It made some of the visuals so. The visuals, of course, were also gorgeous. I mean, I love Marvel movies that are so fantasy and escapist. I love Wakanda for the visuals. Okay, another Japanese horror, Ju-on the Grudge 2. This is from 2003. This was a sequel to Ju-on. There were 2 TV movies that came out back in like 1999 and 2000, and then there were the theatrical movies. Ju-on 2 has the infamous wig with the eye coming out of it. I might have seen this movie when I was in high school as well. But I definitely saw Ju-on 1 years ago. So I watched it this year, but I didn't rank it in here. So I've seen both of the Ju-on movies for this year, but I only ranked number 2, just like with Ring, because I definitely remembered the first ones. The second one I didn't remember as much. Immaculate. Sydney Sweeney in a very different kind of role to Anyone But You. Way better than I thought it would be. Pretty gnarly. Those last 5 minutes are absolute brilliance, though. This movie, it's not as supernatural as you might think. And there's a lot of nun movies out right now. So I liked that it took a different kind of angle to the other nun movies that I'm going to be talking about. Yeah, I don't know. It was a little better than I thought, and a little better than I feel like critics gave it scores for. Ouija Origin of Evil. Way better than the original Ouija movie. I've never actually even seen the original Ouija. I heard it was so bad, but I did watch this sequel. It's not really a sequel because it's tied to the original, but it's like kind of its own thing. Um, Maybe it's a prequel. I can't remember, but it's Mike Flanagan. So Haunting of Hill House, Mike Flanagan. So I had to give it a shot. I had to give it a try. I was a little let down. I think I was overhyping it a little bit, but it was still a good time. The Lighthouse. Okay, this is probably extremely controversial because as you can see, I have it at number 90 and I have 3.5 stars for it. I know that that is kind of low for what a lot of people would consider to be a art house horror classic and one of potentially Robert Eggers' best films. I would disagree. I think this is my least favorite Robert Eggers film out of the 4 that I have seen or that are out. I do think it's style over substance. I do love a little bit of where the allegory of it is going, the Prometheus angle. I can appreciate that it's allegory and that this film is not too literal, but it just, at a certain point, broke me and I had a hard time watching. But I will also say, this is not a movie that I would advise watching if you are currently not getting enough vitamin D, going through any form of depression, and or panic and anxiety issues. If you are prone to panic attacks, I don't recommend watching this movie in a dark room in the middle of the night by yourself. Watch it in the daytime. Maybe watch it don't in surround sound in my movie home theater. It got to be too much that I had to turn it off and I had to finish it while I took a bath, like with the lights on my phone screen. That was how I could finish this movie because I've been having some trouble with my anxiety resurging recently, and I think this was just a bad time for me to watch a movie that is so anxiety inducing. This movie is so depressing. It's a meditation in depression, I would say, is what this movie is. And it is gorgeous. I mean, the black and white cinematography is just so gorgeous. But, at the end of the day, is it an enjoyable experience? And art is not always meant to be enjoyable. But yikes. I was just so, I don't want to say even disturbed, but just disquieted. And unfortunately, it just wasn't the right night for me to watch it. But I'm glad I finished it. But yes, just a forewarning to The Lighthouse. My brother had warned me when he saw it that it was like, yeah, don't watch it at night by yourself in the dark room. And especially if you're dealing with any depression. Talk to Me. This was a movie I was really excited to see and was a little let down by. The premise was so intriguing, and I was also hearing all of the buzz saying it was like one of the scariest, best horror films ever. This is an Australian film that A24 picked up to distribute it in the United States. Grabbing this mummified hand and trying to connect to the dead. Now, one of the protagonists does something so stupid in the movie that took me out of it a little bit. But horror movies, you always have to suspend your disbelief about poor decisions to further the plot. Because if they didn't do it, we wouldn't have a movie. But it is what it is. Some foot play. I'll just say that if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I don't know. I wanted a little more from it. There's definitely some jarring, intense scenes. Very sad story. Doesn't end well for anyone. Orion in the Dark was DreamWorks' third film of 2024. They put out 3 movies in 2024, and everyone knows about 2 of them. But Orion in the Dark was a Netflix release. It didn't go to theaters. And I feel like that really hurt it because it was such an interesting concept. It felt like something Pixar would have done, personifying not only day and night, but also aspects of day and night. So you have personified dreams, you have personified insomnia, quiet, unexplained noises. These are all given creature designs, just like, the Inside Out films for Pixar. And so the creative ways in which they interplay with each other to, represent how day and night cycles through humans' lives and the lives on Earth is really interesting. And it's a story about a boy overcoming his fear of the dark. I recommend it. I think it was a little kind of swept under the radar, and I was like, this is a really interesting idea for a movie. And as a DreamWorks movie, I thought it was perfectly passable and fine. A Quiet Place Day One. I saw this also on an airplane, which I'm going to be honest with you is probably not a good decision. The reason why I chose to watch it on the flight was because I was looking for movies to watch, and I knew there wasn't going to be a lot of dialogue because a lot of this movie is them trying not to talk because that's the premise of the movie. So I thought, oh, this is a great movie, but I felt like I lost a lot of the subtlety of it. If I had seen it on a big screen, I think I would have been more engrossed in the story. I love the Quiet Place movies for the concept, and there were parts of this movie I found riveting, but maybe because I was watching it on an airplane, I was taken out of it too many points. The cat, though, as a lover of cats, I was rooting for that cat. I was like, please don't kill that cat. Oh, I cannot see that on screen. I cannot see that on screen. Maria. This is probably the next most, maybe even more disappointing than Blitz. This movie really let me down. When I heard that Pablo Larraín was going to be making a biopic about the opera singer Maria Callas, who I didn't know too much about going into this movie, but I had heard of before, with Angelina Jolie playing her, I was like, this is definitely going to win Best Actress at the Oscars. Like, this is definitely going to be a contender for a lot of awards. And then the reviews came out from Venice, and it was just like, this movie's not good. And I was like, I saw the trailers, and I was like, no way. No way this movie's bad. Like, I'm seeing the trailers for it, and I'm just like, this looks so beautiful. Like, this is music and cinema. And I'm a lot more, receptive to biopics than the average film fan. But I watched it, and I mean, I tried, and I did get more out of it than others have based on my review. I mean, I did give it 3.5 stars. That's pretty generous compared to what a lot of people were giving it. But now the more I've sat with the film, the more I do understand a lot of people's frustrations with it, which is a shame because Maria Callas deserved a good biopic. There were some elements in the flashback scenes where Maria was shown in pre-World War II. Oh, those were really well done. And there were, of course, some sequences where she is going through memories of singing on stage. And I was just, because of the production value and the music, so swept up. But, at the end of the day, she plays a very unsympathetic, kind of spoiled rich white lady in an apartment who kind of goes nuts talking to herself. And that starts to grate on you after a while. You start to lose sympathy for this character. Although I do think Angelina Jolie does a decent job kind of losing herself in the role, I can see where a lot of people left kind of feeling a little lukewarm, if not possibly tepid, and possibly frustrated with this film. It's just such a shame because this was supposed to be a good movie. Why, Pablo? I was a little lukewarm on Spencer. I thought because I'm such The Crown fan, I thought Spencer was a little too cerebral. But I don't know. This movie could have been so much better. Hellhole. Oh my God. This was a completely I don't know how to describe this movie. I recommend it if you like gothic horror, if you like religious horror, if you like monks and nun horror, but this was a really interesting take on it. I had never seen, this is a Polish film from a couple years ago. It is extremely dark. It really goes there with the sort of mythology and the folklore and the religiosity of this. I mean, it felt almost real, and I love when horror films do that. They don't take you out of the story by being too outlandish to not be believable, even though the film is so surreal. I mean, it's obviously very out there. This movie literally looked like the title itself. It's haunting. It's a haunting film about raising the devil and from this church. I've seen so many movies kind of follow this topic, this theme, and I have never seen a movie do it in such a haunting way. There were images from this film that I will never get out of my head. The cinematography is it's dark shots. This movie is so poor, like so dimly lit, but it was so rich on a big screen. I don't know. Recommend it. I recommend it. You might think it's going to be like a CD level film, and it kind of is in parts, but I don't know. It was captivating. Moana 2. I have this in the middle of the pack for a reason. I don't think that this is as bad as people are saying. I find it very interesting that people are so reverent to the first film. When I remember when it came out, the reviews weren't the most glowing. Like, I remember leaving the theater from the first Moana and going, I don't know if this is going to take off like Frozen did. I feel like because Moana became such a success on Disney Plus, there's a lot of revisionist history going on with Moana. I didn't think that people really liked the music that much, but now everyone's like, oh, the score is nothing like the first film. I'm like, You're Welcome is not that much better than Can I Get a Chihu? Okay, they're both kind of Lin-Manuel Miranda clocking it in. I honestly don't think Moana 1 has a soundtrack that is that vastly superior. I think it's mildly a bit better than the soundtrack to Moana 2. Beyond, I don't want to hear Beyond slander. Beyond is possibly even better than How Far I'll Go. I mean, they're at least at this level. But Beyond isn't going to get a Best Original Song nomination, probably. And I mean, a lot of people have trashed it. But people are just like, this movie is garbage. The animation doesn't look as good. The songs aren't as good. The story, the animation looks gorgeous. What movie are you watching? Maybe because I saw it in Dolby, and I don't often see films in Dolby in theaters. I was just like, the water is alive and captivating. I couldn't look away from it. It was just as mesmerizing as it was in the first film. Yes, the story is a little more, well, we all know the story behind the movie, so I'm not going to harp on about it. But yes, it's a TV series that was turned into a movie. You can see how that might have happened, but think it I don't think it felt too episodic. I felt like it was a fun adventure movie for children that, as an adult, we have to remember is a Disney movie that is meant to be for all ages, but still geared more towards children. So I don't know. I was too kind on it probably with my review, but I still feel like Moana 2 has been unfairly kind of categorized as a complete bastardization sequel when we have way worse Disney sequels. This is not as bad as Ralph Breaks the Internet. The character progression makes sense for a lot of the characters, like for Moana and Maui. Like, they're behaving how I would expect them to behave in a sequel. The villain is not actually I won't give away. I don't want this video to have a lot of spoilers in it. The villain leaves a little to be desired, and it obviously sets up a third film, which we know is going to happen because Moana is a cash cow for Disney, and that's all Disney cares about is IP that they can milk dry. I really hope that original animated film in 2026 that we're getting at Thanksgiving is something big and special. Because we've got a lot of sequels coming from Disney in the next few years otherwise. So, and Elio as well this year. I hope Elio is good, but also successful. But yeah, Moana 2, people hate on it because they want to hate on it. I don't know. It's perfectly fine. Maybe Disney should be held to a higher standard, but I just genuinely do not think it is such a drastic dip in quality from the first Moana. I really don't. It is a little, but not to the level people are saying. Not to the level people are saying. Hitman is a movie that, if I hadn't seen potential awards buzz around, I probably would have never even watched. But this is a really fun, smart comedy thriller with twists and turns that I didn't see coming. The premise was so bizarre. I had a really hard time wrapping my head around the premise of the movie, so I won't even try and explain it, but just watch it. You'll get what I'm saying. Glenn Powell is so likable, and I had a good time with it. Dumb Money. This was a movie about the GameStop stock manipulation from several years ago. Really interesting bird's eye view into the world of stocks and finance, which is something my two brain cells and also very much my right brain side of my two brain cells cannot fathom. But America Ferrera is in it. I love her. Ugly Betty, Barbie. And I don't know, it was a really entertaining, comedic, but also sad take on the way that populism is always stamped down upon by corporate powers. This was a populist movement that was going after hedge fund fat cats and unfortunately blew up in their faces. But it's worth seeing played out. I thought it was a really entertaining movie. Martha Stewart having a biopic this interesting was not on my bingo card for something I would enjoy. I clicked on this thinking I'm not going to enjoy this. This is not really going to be my thing. I was riveted. I am particularly interested in hearing about her trial and going to jail. I had known about it, but I didn't know the details, and so it is such a crazy trumped up case that should never have gone to court that was targeted. I think she was targeted because they wanted to make an example of a wealthy woman. And so I don't know. It was a perfectly fun look at Martha Stewart's life. I had never, I look at some of the stuff she was doing, and as someone who's not into cooking, I was just like, I could never put this much work into catering. Like it's just so much. But I really respect it. I really respect the beauty, the pursuit of aesthetic and ideal and perfection. I mean, Martha hammers that down in the documentary, and it's something I never even really attributed to her. But yes, image is so important to her. Aesthetic is so important. As a lover of aesthetic, I couldn't help but kind of feel resonant with that. Shirley, another biopic that should have been better and was definitely swept under the rug. Regina King is Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman to run for president in the United States. This is, a very important story for second wave feminism in the United States. And so I had known a little bit about it, but it further explored it. I mean, it reminded me a lot of the Rustin documentary with Coleman Domingo biopic from last year, which I had watched last year. It was on my 2023 ranking video. Similar sort of perfectly safe biopic territory for both very talented actors and actresses who are at the center of portraying these very important figures. So if you missed it and you love that kind of thing, you've got to watch this movie. But I think 80 out of 155 says what it needs to say. It was perfectly fine, perfectly safe. Watcher is it's like a Hitchcockian thriller about a woman feeling like she's being watched, observing that she's being watched by her neighbor across the street. I believe it's set in Budapest. Is it Budapest or Bucharest? It's either in Hungary or Romania. And it's about like a woman in the city and she doesn't know anyone. It's a really, kind of haunting story about being a stranger in a city, and particularly as a woman and dealing with, stalkers. But it's a thrilling watch. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. This is one of the first Planet of the Apes movies you will see on this list. Unfortunately, I do have it at the bottom of all of the Planet of the Apes movies that I saw this year for the first time. This is, of course, the newest one. It is sort of a relaunch of the sequel of the trilogy of films that came out several years ago. Post-apocalyptic in a world that's completely overgrown, beautiful CGI, beautiful vistas, a pretty gripping story. Not quite as emotionally impactful as some of the earlier films, but a decent follow-up to continue the story. It obviously sets up another film. There's definitely going to be another. And so, because humans are sort of trying to find a way to return, and there's a big cliffhanger at the end. But as you will see, there are Planet of the Apes movies that I like more that I've just seen for the first time coming up on this list. At 77, we have Fire Island. This was from a few years ago. This is Bowen Yang of SNL's kind of his like bridesmaids basically. No, it's a gay rom-com that is pretty raunchy and it's fabulous. It's everything you'd want from a Bowen Yang comedy. I definitely appreciated the eye candy on display. I had a good time with it. I definitely think that this is the answer film to a much cringier attempt at a gay rom com that came out the same year, which is called Bros by Billy Eichner. I watched that movie for the first time in 2023, and I talked about it last year when I did this kind of video. That was a big disappointment. But this movie came out the same year, and I think is just a better testament to gays making bad decisions, but it's just a better film. It's more entertaining. I think a little better representative of at least, I don't know, a specific type of gay. It's a little more diverse, with the characters that you see portrayed and the experiences they have. And I mean, some of it's a little cringe. It's not a movie you take very seriously, and some of it's very preposterous, but I enjoyed it for what it was. The Young Woman in the Sea is a biopic, a sports biopic about Trudy Ederle, who is the first woman who successfully was able to swim across the English Channel. And so this is a heartwarming story of a woman who, defied, patriarchal expectations of her and of swimmers. She was a remarkable pioneer in that sport. And, having it come out around the Olympics this year, and my parents were like religiously watching swimming. And the fact that this movie actually features a lot of practice in Olympic swimming as well was like a nice tie-in. Disney really should have given this a proper theatrical release and promoted it more. Because Walt Disney Live Action Studios doesn't put out movies like this anymore that aren't tied to a franchise. And so I really appreciate seeing, more kind of introspective filmmaking from them. And it's just a shame that it was kind of completely buried. But I decided to put the two swimming biopic movies that I saw this year together. I actually have Naiad above Young Woman in the Sea, which might be a little controversial for some. This is a story, and it's a more modern story from just 10 years ago, of the first woman to ever swim from Cuba to Key West in Florida, which is a much larger distance. And if I'm not mistaken, unlike The Young Woman in the Sea, which is just about the first woman to do something, Diana Nyad, played by Annette Bening here, is the first human to actually achieve this, which is even more of a phenomenal. I mean, it was literally thought to be impossible. She swims over 100 miles at the age of 60. So that is definitely a crazy story. And I think, Annette Bening was sort of her not Oscar nomination. It was kind of one of the villain nominees from last year's Oscars. But I don't necessarily think that her performance wasn't deserving. I just think there were actresses who were snubbed that maybe deserved it a little more. But she definitely deserved to be in the conversation. She had a very physical performance. I didn't find as much wrong with it as others did, but Jodie Foster was even stronger. And so Jodie Foster getting a supporting actress nomination was nice as well. Yeah, I don't know. People don't like traditional biopics, but I found this to be a really gripping and entertaining watch. So be that as it may. Speaking of true stories, Into the Wild is a 2007 film about a man who goes off to live in the wild, but in the 90s, but his goal is to go all the way up to Alaska, and he eventually gets there in this van, but spoiler alert, he ends up eating some poison berries and dying. He does a pretty good job at staying alive for a couple of years and, making the most of his situation. Now, he is a rich man who is cosplaying as poor. He's doing this because he just is sick of his family life and the world that he feels like he's being groomed to be in. And so he wants to kind of just live off the grid. There are elements of this movie I really respect. Sean Penn is the director. And then when you get into the actual story, there are elements of it that give me a little bit of like, this seems like glorifying someone making a stupid decision. Like the poor family. The family is almost villainized at times in the story. And I just feel for them so much. And then Kristen Stewart appears in this, but only very briefly. The whole time I was watching it, I was like, when is Kristen Stewart going to show up? This is one of her first ever roles. So I don't know. I recommend it for the scenery, for the sort of whimsical kind of Americana stuff that you get to see. But it did, I don't know. Left me feeling a little hollow at times, just because I question this young man's motives. But again, I guess the film, it's not entirely, endorsing everything he chooses to do. I See You is a out of left field horror thriller that Helen Hunt is one of the protagonists for, that is about frogging, which is something I'd never heard of before. But it is when I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but all I'm going to do is it's about, people living in your house when you and trying to evade you discovering that they're there. That's all I'm going to say. And so it's an eerie kind of setup for that kind of idea, and so it plays out really well. It's very, very intense. See How They Run. This is a sort of Hercule Poirot type, London whodunit caper. Someone I know recommended it as like something I was going to watch with my family, and it has Saoirse Ronan in it. And one of the Letterboxd reviews said, Saoirse Ronan with a notepad is just all we need. So I was like, yeah, I kind of feel that. I didn't get too much out of it, but it was an enjoyable watch for my family who loves, Agatha Christie novels and things like that. Juror number 2. This is Clint Eastwood's final film, and it was unceremoniously dumped on Max and barely given a theatrical release. I think that is a little unfortunate. It is a really interesting premise about a juror who, I guess it's a spoiler, but it's also sort of in the premise of the film, so it's not really that big of a spoiler, who discovers that they actually committed the crime that he is sitting on the jury for. And so he has to grapple with, does he turn himself in? How hard does he try and get the other guy convicted? And it's a juror deliberation piece, so it's a little bit like 12 Angry Men. I enjoyed it for what it was. It was a little bit of like a Lifetime movie at times in the feel, but overall it was an enjoyable experience. And Toni Collette, always steals the scene. Woman of the Hour was an interesting Anna Kendrick directed film, again, based on a real story about a serial killer who went on a dating show in the 70s. This would be a lot higher on my list if it was a little more about the victims of the actual crimes. The women who he raped and killed were sort of glossed over for Anna Kendrick's character story, which she is a fictional character injected into these events, which I understand why she went that route, but I also feel like maybe after having seen other people talk about it, I'm like, yeah, I can sort of see how it glosses over a little bit this very real story, horrendous story. And of course, she ends up, evading this man by, just in the nick of time, having someone kind of find them in a parking lot when she is realizing this guy is a creep. I won't give too much more away. It's still a gripping, edge of your seat film at a lot of points that I still recommend seeing on Netflix. The Creator, I saw this right at the beginning of the year, a year ago, and already my memory of it is a little foggy, especially after having seen Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I love seeing original sci-fi that is like really atmospheric, very visual. The cinematography is absolutely stunning. The special effects. I don't remember a lot about the plot of this movie. I wanted more from it, though. I do remember that. I wanted more from this sort of, AI uprising story. It was perfectly fine, but the visuals definitely overtook the story. Priscilla was another movie I watched on the airplane, and again, it's fine for an airplane viewing, but a lot of these movies are not ideal for it. It's about Priscilla Presley. It's a pretty good biopic. It's a bit, I don't want to say it's by the numbers, but it did remind me a lot of The Eyes of Tammy Faye with Jessica Chastain. I felt like it was obviously a not sympathetic view of Elvis, unlike the Austin Butler Baz Luhrmann film from a couple years ago. And ultimately, I do think this is the better Elvis biopic, even though it's about Priscilla. Kaylee Spaney is good in the role. She's very much the center of this. Jacob Elordi sells it too, though. He does a good job. Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. I can't believe that I have watched the first and second Pirates movies so many times throughout my life since I was a kid when they came out. But I had never seen At World's End, which is even more kind of flabbergasting considering it is part two to the 2006 film. They are basically one long film. They weren't advertised that way, but they basically were because the second film ends on such a huge cliffhanger. And I saw the second film in theaters in 2006, but I did not see the third film until 2024. I don't know why I never got around to it. I didn't even know it came out that year. I just wasn't paying attention to it in 2007, I guess. And I was too into Harry Potter, the Order of the Phoenix, I guess. That was all I was watching that summer. I wasn't interested in Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. But this is, I think, the true end of the Pirates franchise. I know that there's a 2011 movie and a 2017 movie. I don't want to go near them. I've heard they are absolutely horrible, and they also do not have Keira Knightley or Orlando Bloom in them for the most part. So I don't want it. I think that this was a perfect wrap up to the trilogy. It is balls to the wall. It is a very, it is the weakest of the three films, I think. But, it still has that Gore Verbinski magic because the rest of the films were not directed by him. So, I give this one a lot of credit for that. Emilia Perez. Oh, goodness. I knew I could spend a long time talking about this film. I think 66 is a fair placement for it. Some people may be annoyed that that it's not lower. Emilia Perez is a fine film if you don't look into it too deeply. Now, it is not worthy of Golden Globe for Best Comedy Musical, and it is not worthy of a Best Picture nomination, especially after you look into the film. Look into how it was made, look into what people from Mexico and Latin America are saying about the film, what the trans community is saying about the film, what the director has said, Jacques Ardiard, who is a Frenchman. All of the people who are acting in the film are not from Mexico, and almost none of them spoke fluent Spanish and had to learn it before they, like Selena Gomez, for example, before filming. Selena Gomez knew a tiny bit of Spanish, but very little. Zoe Saldana knew some from when she was a child, but she still had to sort of relearn it. Carla Sofia Gascon was one of the only ones who didn't. She is from Spain. She is not from Mexico. But she is a trans actress. So, I mean, the representation for her is good. However, the way a trans character is depicted in this film is problematic. There's a whole, just even looking at the Letterboxd reviews, they'll give you a good idea. There's a lot of great video essays that I have seen about this movie, about how, the transition of this drug cartel boss, how it sort of absolves them of all of the horrible things done to all these people, how it simplifies transition in a way that is not really authentic to how trans people actually view the transition process. More glaringly, there is a scene where the character of Emilia Perez, she lets out a masculine sort of violent outburst against her ex-wife, played by Selena Gomez, which is not a good look for for how the trans community is viewed, trans women in particular, because there is a transphobic, fear that trans women are still very violent and aggressive. And I don't think that particular scene, that was the one that struck out the most to me as ooh, I don't know. You could defend it and say, well, not all trans people are good people. But when trans representation in Hollywood is still so new, we have to be careful about what kind of imagery we are exporting. However, I don't necessarily think a lot of people who are transphobic are going to watch this movie. So it's preaching to the choir for the most part. This movie was made for the industry. Hollywood loves this movie, the general public does not. And so it is a real testament to diversity check boxes that don't mean anything when they ring hollow in the actual source material, in the actual story writing. The research was not done. I saw someone point out, and again, as an English speaker from the US, I didn't pick up on this at all. Watching this film as someone from Mexico would be like watching a film set in Kansas where everyone has Australian accents. It would just be so aggravatingly unrealistic that they're being portrayed as natives that it would drive you off the wall. And there's a lot of other issues how Mexico is portrayed in terms of drug violence. There are these problems in that community, but it's a very Eurocentric view of the sort of global South, as some may call, places like South America, Latin America, Central America. So I see all these. I will say, when I first saw it, I thought it was a fine film. There were elements to the way it was shot, the stylistic nature of the shot. It was a very slick film. Now, it is a musical, which is also slightly baffling. This is not a movie that screams it needs to be a musical. And I do cover music on this channel, so I guess I got to weigh in on some of the songs. Mi Camino is the only song that is listenable on the soundtrack. I might be a little biased because I am a little more partial to Selena Gomez and her music, but I did not like her other song. I don't even remember what it's called. I don't even like that song. Mi Camino is not a great song, but it's a serviceable pop tune with a catchy hook. But apparently the lyrics are extremely cringe in Spanish. So many of the ways they speak are not indigenous. It's not genuine to how Mexicans speak. And it's a frustrating experience for those in Mexico to see this being made, and of course for the trans community. And of course there is the iconic I Want to Learn About Sex Change Operation song, which you've probably seen all over the interwebs. Yes, that song is in the movie, and I don't know, the campiness of it didn't bother me as much as it might have bothered others. But when you look at it as like a Best Picture nominee, you just kind of are a little like, what? What? These songs are absolute garbage. Forget about how dubious they may be with the lyrics, but the actual melodies are horrible. The singing is pretty bad. I mean, Zoe Saldana is good in her role, but she is not really good with singing, especially in some of the bigger numbers. Um, El Mal is the one that won Golden Globe for Best Original Song. I have a feeling it's going to win at the Oscars as well. I would vastly prefer Mi Camino, but I would also prefer maybe a song not from Emilia Perez to win, because it's such a clusterfuck of a movie. I don't know what else to tell you. If you're interested, watch it on Netflix. There are some. It will grip you. It will grip you. And if you do sort of suspend your disbelief about certain things, but I don't know, once you know the things that I've just said, I feel like if I had known these things before I watched the movie, I would have been a lot more turned off to it. I went in a little blinder, so I kind of enjoyed it, and then I was like, oh, but those are all strikes against it. Those are all strikes against it. How can I say anything good about this film? Anyway, I could go on and on about it, but yeah, it's a bit of a mess. One Life. This is a film about a real life person, Nicholas Winton. He rescued 600 some children from Czechoslovakia in World War II. He had of course, a lot of help from a bunch of British embassy workers over in I believe it was Prague that he was rescuing these people from, somewhere near Prague. But he's the one who's sort of credited it, and Anthony Hopkins does a phenomenal job. And then, of course, he goes on this broadcast where all of the former rescued people who are still alive show up and surprise him, and it's a very emotional moment. And that really did happen on TV. And so, as a British World War II nostalgic biopic, it chucks all the right boxes for, again, wonderful viewing with my parents. Saint Maud, a little bit of a different twist on the Catholic religious horror stuff. It's about a woman who is so pious that she, well, I won't spoil it, but she goes to extreme lengths. That's all I'm gonna say. My friend that I was watching it with really didn't like it, but I secretly I didn't want to argue with them. I really enjoyed it. Morfydd Clark, who plays Galadriel in Rings of Power. This is the only other thing I've ever seen her in, and she gave a really compelling performance. Enchanted April. This was apparently my British grandmother's favorite movie, and it's from 1992. And we watched it around Thanksgiving. My parents wanted us to watch, a throwback movie that I had never seen, my brother had never seen. And this is for fans of Downton Abbey, this is right up our alleys. This is such a saccharine film, but it's so delightful. Although I'll be honest with you, it started to lose my attention in the last third. What I think is sort of the most frustrating is that these women go to Italy to live in this rented house to originally escape their husbands, but they end up bringing their husbands to the villa and all kind of stay with their husbands. And it's like everyone wants them to be lesbians. Everyone wants them to ditch their husbands because it would be a lot more of an interesting feminist story if that were the case. But, this is supposed to be set in the 20s or 30s, if I'm not mistaken. So Joan Plowright steals the show, though. Joan Plowright steals the show. I believe she got a supporting actress nomination for this film. Dream Productions, Inside Out had a TV series come out this year that no one cares about. I'm actually shocked how little anyone has talked about this. There's only 4 episodes, but they are really well made, and they're actually long. I mean, Pixar has in the past put out these little shorts, but they're like maybe 8 minutes at most. And then there's like 10 minutes of credits, so they look like they're really long. But these episodes, some of them are like 20 something minutes. I mean, they're actual little, half-hour little episodes, and they tell a cohesive story about the dream studios that are in Riley's mind. If you've seen the Inside Out films, you'll know what I'm talking about, and how they try and keep their jobs. I mean, it's really interesting to see how, the Inside Out universe, you don't want to think too hard about it because it's so meta and so like micro inside of someone's head and the machinations of it. And how everyone would have this kind of studio that runs their dreams. And there's some really interesting kind of concepts about dreams thrown out in the film. But I love the Inside Out universe. And so I really enjoyed this. The River Wild, Meryl Streep working her arm muscles on some whitewater rafting with Kevin Bacon. It's a 90s popcorn movie, but a cut above the rest. That's all I'm going to say. Highly recommend. Great shots of, Montana. I don't know why this movie came on my radar this year, but I watched it on Netflix. I was like looking for something. I was like, oh, this was an entertaining watch. Another limited series, we have Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story. I think unless you live under a rock, you've probably heard about this Ryan Murphy show that came out this year. It was a huge hit for Netflix. I had not watched the Dahmer series. It just was too dark for me. This is a little, it's dark, but it's not nearly as dark. The Monsters series, I didn't know a lot about the Menendez brothers, so it was very eye-opening. They don't get everything accurate, though. It is a Ryan Murphy show, so you have to keep that in mind. The performances are incredible, particularly Cooper Koch. Is it Koch or Koch? I'm not entirely sure. I think it's like the Koch brothers, Koch, Koch. But anyway, and Nicholas Alexander Chavez, they are very good looking. It's kind of distracting, but also like truly incredible. So I definitely recommend this series if you like crime thriller court procedural things with lots of LA 80s and 90s stuff. Ryan Murphy. It's a Ryan Murphy project. Origin. This is an Ava DuVernay film. I saw this a while ago. I'm trying to remember. It's about a professor who is trying to come up with a thesis to connect different cultures around the world to explain racism. And what she ultimately concludes, and this is based on a real presentation that she gave, this real woman, is the reality of caste. And so she looks at different societies on the globe. She looks at, the United States with the history of racism, but she also looks at India, and she explores how caste is this dark subtext of human othering of other humans, of societal issues. So it's a philosophical film, and then she's also dealing with personal loss at the same time. So it doesn't always juggle the two narratives it's trying to work with very well. Maybe it would have worked better as a documentary about the woman and her findings from doing this research, this sociological research. But a very intriguing film for sure. The Mauritanian, speaking of Jodie Foster, this is a movie from a couple years ago about a Guantanamo Bay prisoner, a real story, who was falsely held for having alleged involvement in 9/11. And basically, it took forever for him to finally get out. And so it involves like his lawyer helping him with that process. And at the beginning, he's very shut off to the idea because he's lost all hope. It's a very sad story. If you look up the reality of it too, it'll make you not look too fondly on the U.S. government. And not just the Republican presidents as well. All U.S. presidents. Obama doesn't come off too squeaky clean in this one either. Wicked Little Letters. This is a really absurdist story, but it's apparently somewhat true. At least parts of it are. A woman is receiving very vulgar, hate mail, and it starts to spread out all over the town and even all over, I believe, the local area. And I won't give it away, but finding out who's writing it is the central part of it. And Olivia Colman is such a wonderful, kooky character here. A really fun movie. Marrowbone is probably one of the better sort of like slightly indie horror films I saw this year. It's about three children who live in a house after their mother dies in the UK, but it's set many years ago. I think it's set in the 60s or something. I'm not entirely sure when it's set, many decades ago. And they have to contend with this sinister presence and someone trying their ex, the father trying to come back, and there's this violent struggle, and it's really gripping. The Lego Movie. I can't believe I never saw it. Now I have. I don't really have much more to say about it than I enjoyed it. I wasn't that entertained because, I don't know, it just kind of felt like a little bit of a predictable, safe Lego sponsorship kind of movie. But at the same time, I appreciate the creativity of making a movie at Legos. I probably should see the second one. That's on my list for this year. All right, we've got the third Planet of the Apes film, War of the Planet of the Apes. This one was the one that came out in 2017. I have it lowest as the trilogy because I do feel like it. Most people agree it's just not quite as emotionally impactful. There is still a lot of high stakes to it. The human versus apes drama is escalated, though maybe not to the level you might think for a film called War of the Planet of the Apes. It's definitely a good film. It's just not quite to the level of the other two. Philadelphia. As someone who lives in Philadelphia, this was a staple film that I probably needed to see at some point. And also as a gay man. Tom Hanks, Denzel Washington. Tom Hanks is a gay man dying of AIDS. Denzel Washington is a lawyer who ends up representing him. He is initially homophobic, but once he gets to learn more about his client, he starts to evolve his views because he is Tom Hanks's character is suing his employer for wrongful termination due to him contracting AIDS. So it's a very kind of powerful movie for the time it was made. It is now, by today's standards, perhaps a little less best representative of the queer community today, but for 1993, when it came out, it was a revolutionary film. There are some very homophobic things that come out of Denzel Washington's mouth, but it's very reminiscent of that time period of the 80s in which it's meant to be set. So you can't really fault at that. A Bug's Life. I do believe I did see this film as a kid, but I had no recollection of it well enough to actually rank. So I had to rewatch it this year, but for all intents and purposes, I'm considering it a first time view. Obviously, I gave it 4 stars. It's a classic, one of Pixar's first films. What more can we say? All right, Anatomy of a Fall. Woo, all the way down at 51. Ooh, some of you may be a little like, what now? Yeah, this won Best Screenplay Original at the Oscars last year, not adapted. Ooh, I don't know, y'all. I tried with this one. I definitely think it deserves 51 here, and I had it a little higher in my ranking of just 2023 films. But I didn't walk away from it feeling as blown away as maybe I expected. Maybe I was going into this one feeling like it was a little like I was like, oh, my expectations were too high. There are times where I look at films that critics go goo goo gaga over, and I'm a little bit like, yeah, it's a good film, but is it that good? Why are we going crazy over this and other films like sometimes it feels a little weird to me. I don't know. Justine Triet is very talented. I do think it deserved a Best Picture nomination, unlike, Emilia Perez, for example. This is definitely a solid film, and I can live with the screenplay win, because the screenplay is strong. But I don't know. I just didn't feel like it was as galvanizing as I expected it to be. There's a scene where she has an argument with her husband that I found to be the most magnetic. And of course, the boy. The boy does a pretty good job with the tension off playing that from his mother in the mystery and all of that. Joaquin Phoenix falling in love with a chatbot or a Siri kind of prototype. It's a sweet film. Very sad. It's a very sad, sweet film. What can I say? I'm going to try and go through these a little quicker here. The Color Purple. Never seen the Broadway musical. Never watched the original 1985 film, which I know is kind of controversial to say. I really dug the adaptation. This is a, colorful, choreographed, well executed performance. I loved so many of the songs. The closing song, The Color Purple, was on my best songs of the year list in 2023. It was in my top 40 songs of the year. Fantasia Barrino really stole the show. I feel like she should have definitely gotten a Best Actress nomination, even though Danielle Brooks also deserved supporting as well. We got the original Sister Act. There you go. What more can I say? Way better than Sister Act Part 2. I mean, Sister Act 2 is good. Not saying it's bad. I'm just saying the first one is stronger. Also, rest in peace, Maggie Smith, once again. I did watch these Sister Act movies before she passed away this year. Nimona. I saw a lot of buzz about this movie on Netflix when, I believe it was nominated at the Oscars for animation. And a lot of people wanted it to win. And I was like, no, Boy and the Heron. But yeah, it was pretty good. I can definitely see a trans allegory in the character and the protagonist. I think this might have been one of the first movies I watched of 2024, so forgive me if I don't remember that much about it. But it was definitely a well-made animated film. Late Night with the Devil was a trip. This is a horror movie from this year. I recommend if you like horror. Some people love it, some people hate it. But it's based on a premise that I find so fascinating. A broadcast of an exorcism that goes wrong on broadcast television in the 70s. I eat this kind of stuff up. It's a little found footage, but it's also like an actual movie of the events. The girl they bring on stage is so unsettling. There's some imagery in this film that I just can't get out of my head because it is so haunting. A very dark film. Very dark film. One of those films you do feel like you need to kind of self-exercise yourself after seeing. Agatha all along, very light, fun, spooky Halloween MCU series. Speaking of, my dipping into the MCU, this is the kind of Marvel content I am here for. This is the first ever Marvel television show I've ever seen, and it might be one of the only ones I ever watch. I'm a fully on board with Agatha as a character, and of course Wanda, but she's not in this. Catherine Hahn is phenomenal in this. Patti LuPone even more so, particularly that episode of hers where she's sort of spotlighted. I just love that though this exists in a superhero space, this feels so much more like a sort of completely separate thing that doesn't have actually that much action. The action is fine, but I'm not a huge action girly. So I was more into the sort of kind of puzzles and intrigue of the mystery of the story and just sort of the Wizard of Oziness of it all. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it way more than I expected I would. Speaking of another movie I saw that I needed a church to perform an exorcism on me after seeing, The Soonberry Devil. Now, this is a film that is not on many people's radar, but I did find it on Tubi this year, watched it with a friend. It is from last year, and it is about 1600s, witch trials, but it's more of like colonists dealing with a woman who is purported to be a witch, and they have to go into the woods because the church has told them, like, this person needs to be saved from the devil. And they are missionaries of God going into this New England forest. If you've seen Robert Eggers' The Witch, it is in conversation with that film. This film was obviously heavily inspired from Robert Eggers' kind of stuff. It has extremely period accurate dialect and costuming for the figures to the point where you almost need subtitles because they are speaking English, but it is a 17th century style of English that you definitely might not understand very quickly, easily, if you don't have a clear ear for it. A very gnarly film, a very psychedelic film. That's all I'm going to say about that. If you are into gnarly, witchy movies that are very supernatural, this is right up your alley, and it was definitely up mine. Ooh, controversy again. Challengers, all the way down at 43. I am so sorry this is not higher. I must confess this was one of the other movies that I watched on a plane this year. I do feel like it sort of is an airplane movie because it's a little light and fluffy in that regard. But at the same time, to appreciate the cinematic excellence on display and the editing and the shots and the soundtrack, you probably do need to see it on a big screen. And so a part of me feels like this is owed at some point a revisit on my big, 50 inches projector. But at some point I will get around to that. But it's tough because, I have to look at the film. If I take out the two lead actors and how attractive they are, and I place in actors who aren't as attractive, am I left with this film feeling that remotely exciting to me? Not so much. Mike Feist does a lot to sell this movie for me. Of course, Zendaya as well. She is an absolute queen in this film, but Josh O'Connor and Mike Feist are so sexy. And the film, being directed by a queer man, loves to look at them. The camera loves them in this movie in all the right ways. I mean, I felt like I was watching a softcore porno at many points. The Challengers score is phenomenal, and it does deserve to win the Oscar Best Score. It did at the Golden Globes. I was happy to see that. I have the song Challengers Match Point in the top 40 songs of 2024. I don't like Compress Repress as much. I feel like the instrumental tracks are stronger. They are hardcore techno energizing kind of stuff. This is a really exciting kind of movie though, because it's just like a mid-budget character examination. It's got a sports setting, but it's not entirely about sports. It's a lot more kind of deeper than that, about interpersonal relationships. With a queer slant. And I do love seeing, sports movies going in the more queer direction, because a lot of those men in athletic fields are mighty fine. And whenever I watch them, I'm always kind of, my mind's going other places. So it's really kind of nice to see movies that are super big, mainstream, box office, somewhat successes capitalize on that for kind of the first time. So that's pretty exciting. But it is a bit of a tease. The men on men action is only teased. You do want more of it. American Fiction was an Oscar nomination for last year. It won Best Adapted Screenplay, whereas Anatomy of a Fall won Best Original. And as you can see, I liked American Fiction a little bit more than Anatomy of a Fall. It's a solid movie, very well written. The screenplay is super sharp. It's about a man who decides to troll his publisher because his publisher wants him to write a black book, and this black man does not know what that means, to try and sell to white people. And so he creates a book that is a complete parody of, I mean, as a white person, I feel almost bad talking about it, but if you look into it, it's a really interesting concept that explores, white people's relationship, particularly liberal white people's relationship to race and how they often talk about it, but from the black person's perspective, something that's important to be reminded of. But there's also, similar to Origin, interpersonal drama that is interwoven into the backbone of the story. Tracy Ellis Ross's character dies very early in the film. I don't think it's a huge spoiler, but the way she dies, as someone who's terrified of dropping dead at any given moment, that was kind of traumatic to see. I was just like, she's not that old. You don't just drop dead like that. What the heck? Anyone else a little jarred by that? I couldn't believe her character was killed off like that. It was just a little strange to me. But anyway, Castle in the Sky. I have continued to go down my Studio Ghibli research rabbit hole, and I only actually saw one Studio Ghibli movie for the first time this year, but that one was Castle in the Sky. I saw a lot more last year, and I still have a couple more I need to see this year. This is one of the earliest ones, and it had a music theme that I'd actually heard before. Kimi wo Niseti, I'd heard that before. I didn't realize I'd heard it, but really gorgeous set piece of this castle in the sky. Once they finally get there, I was just like, and it reminds me so much of Tears of the Kingdom, the new Legend of Zelda game, in some of the architecture of this fantasy island in the sky. I don't remember a ton about the story, but I just remember the visuals. Griselda. This was a really good miniseries. A limited series about Griselda Blanco, who was this queen pin narco, in the 70s and 80s, I believe, in Miami. And she was like the godmother of cocaine smuggling at one point. And so it tracks her rise and fall in the Miami drug world. But amongst that is her dealing with raising her children and her, ex-partners and all the drama that comes in with that. And it's a really compelling watch. Sofia Vergara, a serious major actress performance here. Dark Waters. There's a small part of me that thinks I might have seen this movie before, but I logged it as a first time this year. It's about DuPont poisoning water in Indiana from a chemical plant, and Mark Ruffalo's character has to go against it. And people thought that was a crazy idea for a lawyer to do, a small time lawyer. So it's a take down the big company kind of movie, but a really great, lawyer procedural film. Avengers Endgame. If you remember from my 2023 video, if you watched it, I saw Avengers Infinity War in 2023. That was in December, and then in January of last year, I saw Endgame. So it was a little while ago that I watched this now, but I did watch it for the first time in 2024 as a part of my sort of going through the MCU movies, the big ones, the well-reviewed ones. I do get what this is all about. A part of me is kind of like, oh, you put this above, American Fiction, Anatomy of a Fall, like some of these movies. I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't think you would do that, but I did. It's what I did. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been completely superhero red pilled. I'm still jury is still out on some of the superhero movies that are coming out this year, if I'm going to be that into them. But I bought into it. I drank the milkshake and I enjoyed it for what it was. All of Us Strangers, a movie that should have gotten more Oscar love last year. Again, a movie that I felt was a little overhyped by critics, but I still, at the end of the day, walked away with it saying that is a solid 4-star movie. It is about, gosh, I can't even remember the plot that well. A boy, a guy meeting a neighbor who he ends up finding out is gay, and in the meantime, he's trying to go back and visit his parents. And I don't know, the story is evading me. I'm going to look at the Letterboxd review here. Basically, he meets Paul Mescal, Andrew Scott's character, and everything changes. That's all I'm going to say. Why wouldn't everything change? Paul Mescal is a great performance in here, as well as Andrew Scott. Blackberry, a really snappy, gritty look at the cutthroat world of tech in the 90s and 2000s and the rise and fall of BlackBerry. I never had a BlackBerry phone, but Glenn Howerton steals the show in this. I didn't understand much of what they were saying. There is another tech biopic-y kind of movie coming up on this list that I even had harder time following, but still thought was really good. It's a little better than this one. I do recommend BlackBerry. The First Omen, this is one of those movies that it was like a horror prequel that a lot of people wrote off because we've got all these reboots of horror franchises that are pretty bad. This was really good. It had a real vision. It had a real style. It was genuinely haunting. The imagery, the cinematography, the music of Italy, of Rome, is so haunting. As somewhat, this is Catholic horror done to the best level it could be. I mean, it could be better. It could be better. Some of it didn't really make much sense, but it is a prequel to the original Omen film, and about a woman carrying the Antichrist. And it just, it takes that simple prospect and does really interesting things with it. But be warned, there is some gruesome imagery, very gruesome imagery. Heretic, Hugh Grant proselytizing, but, well, arguing with 2 Mormon missionary girls and then trapping them in his house. And a lot of really interesting questions posited in this movie. It's a philosophical film that then sort of devolves as it moves along. And I will say that the ending lets it down a little bit. I was not as pleased with how it ended. I don't know. I'll be interested to rewatch it and sort of knowing now what I know about the story and the plot twists. I'll be curious what my experience will be as a second time watching, because I think I'm going to show it to my parents. It's one of those movies that, you know, I'm never going to be fully forgiven for showing my parents Hereditary. So I think Heretic might be a slightly safer bet, but, you know, for Hugh Grant alone, like, they've got to see this movie. I do love movies that are thriller mystery like this, but have all of this added layer of pondering such deep spiritual topics in such an interesting way. I just, yeah, this was right up my alley from the trailer. I knew I was really excited to see this. Thelma, this is one of the best comedies of 2024 that I have seen. Deadpool and Wolverine, who? The best comedy of the year is Thelma. I mean, I know I haven't seen Anora yet, so I know Anora probably should take that crown. But Thelma is a hoot. June Squibb still got it. She is trying to get back at a phone scammer who she accidentally gives a ton of money to because they claim that her grandson is in jail. You know, typical old lady gets fooled by someone on the phone pretending to, you know, be a police officer or a lawyer or someone. And so, but it takes this premise and just does really interesting things with it. My mom, since my mom is from Cleveland, she really got a hoot from one of the funniest lines in the film. I won't spoil it, but if you know, you know. There's a line about Cleveland she found really... The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. Yes, I have this considered to be bomb, horrible animation film at 32 because I enjoyed it, goddammit. I am a Lord of the Rings stan. I do defend Rings of Power a little more than the average Tolkien fan would. But this is way better than Rings of Power, okay? I actually reviewed this film on my channel this year. This is the only movie that besides This Is Me Now, I've reviewed 2 movies this year. The Jennifer Lopez movie and this. What does that show about my interests? Anyway. I will always review Lord of the Rings content on this channel. That's why I spotlighted this movie. I gave it a deep dive review. So I won't harp on it too much here, but I do actually like the animation style. I think anime was an interesting choice. It's a little jerky, but I get into it. It didn't bother me. Loved the character of Hera. She felt fully realized. She felt like she fit into the Tolkien universe just fine. I didn't feel like she was a forced feminist character. I felt like she was a balanced feminist character in the story and then fit within the lore. So overall, it has some flaws. I'm not going to ignore that, but I don't know. I refuse to be super negative on this film like so many others are. Though I can understand why it's not getting a Best Animated Feature nomination. I can understand that. The Madness of King George. This is a 1994 movie about the King George III and the time where he convalesced and had to kind of be put away because he was going cuckoo. Not long after the Revolutionary War. A brilliant performance from the lead actor, Nigel Hawthorne, and Helen Mirren as well. A very quirky movie that takes a British period piece and takes it up to 11. Deepwater Horizon. I'm kind of shocked I have this movie at number 30. I'm a little taken aback. I'm like, maybe this movie's like 20 spots too high, but it's where it is, all right? It's what we're going to do. I think it was just because it was so gripping. It's about the 2010 BP oil spill. Mark Wahlberg as the character, it's based on a real story, but invented characters interjected into it. I love disaster movies, and this is a disaster movie that's grounded. I mean, unlike Twisters, which is just like how bizarre can we get? How crazy can we make a disaster movie? This felt just like such a real, I just felt like the whole time I was like, when are things going to go wrong? When are things going to go wrong? And I love movies like that, where, the beginning, some people might think it's a little slow. I was just like on the edge of my seat because I knew shit was about to hit the fan. And when it did, oh my God, what a harrowing movie to watch. Rise of the Planet of the Apes. This is the original 2011 reboot film. I have not seen the films from the turn of the century or the films from the 60s. I don't know if I ever will. This was the film that started the modern Planet of the Apes reboot. And it is the one that I feel is the most, it's the most close to home. It's the one that actually has humans that, are big parts of the story. It's more humans than it is apes at the beginning. And it is just crazy to think about how they were trying to cure Alzheimer's and then all of this happened. Just a series of events went wrong that aren't even that unbelievable that lead to these outcomes. It's just an absolute wild turn of events to watch unfold. Steve Jobs. This is the other movie like Blackberry and from 2015, a examination of points in Steve Jobs' life. It's an isolated biopic, so it's covering 3 different launches of products he made in the 80s and 90s, and I think it ends in 1998, maybe in 2001. I can't remember exactly. So it doesn't even really get to like the iPod or anything like that. It's all the computers he was making. I found it to be just a really compelling performance, although Michael Fassbender portraying Steve Jobs as such a buff guy was a little hard to see past, but you just roll with it. Kate Winslet was great in this. The screenplay was so biting and so smart. Keeping up with the screenplay was just, as someone who doesn't understand tech either, this movie really leaves you in the dust if you don't understand tech and economics. But I still marveled at what I was watching. Killers of the Flower Moon. This was a movie that we had to watch in 2 parts. We gave this film an intermission. I actually had to Google when was a good time to stop watching this film. This is a movie that should be given an intermission like The Brutalist. Martin Scorsese needs to get off his high horse about that. When you do interject the intermission, it might affect your viewing experience, but I still gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it for what it was. Maybe if I hadn't been watching with my parents, I might have sat through the whole thing, but Lily Gladstone, I will forever be a little upset you didn't win Best Actress, but then I did see Poor Things, and I was like, I sort of get it. Her role is a little more minimal in this, but this is a well-paced movie, although that's a critique some people have of it. It is perhaps a movie that could have been edited down because it's a story that goes on a lot longer than maybe it needs to. Takes a long time for things to happen. Um, but it is so soaked in tragedy. It is so deeply an American cautionary tale. It's so haunting in that regard that I think Scorsese knows how to. I don't know. He just knows how to portray humans in a way that they're so detestable but human. And there's a very interesting sort of play of character development going on in this movie, with some flaws, but ultimately I enjoyed it for what it was. Perfect Days. What an important movie for us today. And an important movie, I think, for me, kind of to remember. There's one other movie this year that I'm always going to carry with me because of a scene that will always help me with some mental health stuff I'm dealing with. But I recently watched this movie. I actually watched it only a couple of weeks ago, very end of 2024. And I had made a note. I was like, I have to watch this. I knew it might be a bit of a slog because it's watching a man clean toilets in Tokyo. Let me tell you, though, those bathrooms are spiffy, okay? Those are some spiffy bathrooms. But it is a super bittersweet, heartfelt, simple movie that just reminds us all to take stock of the environment around us and find the little things in life to be thankful for because each new day is a blessing. And so this movie has just so much innocence and joy imbued into it. And it has, I think, been a good reminder for me. I find myself every day thinking about this character and his life and comparing my own life. And when things feel too monotonous or mundane or depressing, it really does beam a little bit of light into your brain. And I think that's what movies should do, good art should do. I do recommend it. His Three Daughters, a screenplay kind of movie, three women gathering for the death of their father, and they have to hash out all their issues and grievances. Natasha Lyonne is the sharpest and the I think most I mean they're all excellent performances. Carrie Coon, um, Elizabeth Olsen, they all bring so much to the table. It's a wallowing kind of movie. There are times where it feels like it's wallowing a little bit, but a little depressing. A little depressing, but that's what you're signing up for when you watch a movie like this. Aaron Brockovich. I had never seen this before, but I had heard it was a classic. And boy, oh boy, was it a classic. A mom who just does the damn thing. She goes after those greedy corporations when people told her she couldn't. And I mean, it's a great way for Julia Roberts to really showcase how serious of an actress she is, while keeping things light at different points. At points, it felt a little bit like we could go into Legally Blonde territory, and then it was so serious and raw, and it reminded me so much of like Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. It like had just such that dichotomy, and it was like really a great straddle of. I mean, I could see why it would do so well with awards voters. The Last Duel, I looked it up. This was the first movie I saw of 2024. So the one I remember the least, it still is pretty memorable. Ridley Scott's largely underrated, kind of forgotten about recent film about some, medieval knights that duel for a woman's love. The story initially didn't really captivate me, but my brother convinced me to watch it. And we all, as a family, I think, really were just the lavish costumes and sets and the period atmosphere was just so inviting. You couldn't help get swept up. It's a very raw, gritty slice of that time that for a Ridley Scott film feels very well researched. Ridley Scott gets a lot of flack for sort of not researching these eras that he likes to portray. This one didn't feel like this one felt more Robert Eggers-esque in terms of the level of detail to that kind of effect. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. This is the second of the three from 2014, and it is the best one. Gripping melodrama, sweeping visuals, everything you could want, action, just a really great culmination of where the first film was going. Taylor Swift, The Eras Tour. I never watched it in theaters. I saw it this year. I actually saw it twice because I had a friend who's a big Swiftie who wanted to see it. I also watched it in two parts, both times, because it is so freaking long. I feel like right after Speak Now, that point is where it's a good stopping point. It's kind of halfway. Yeah, talk about Taylor Swift a lot on this channel. I mean, she did the thing with that tour. It is incredible. The stamina, the athleticism she had to walk up and down that stage for 3 hours over 100 times over 2 years. I mean, I'm just absolutely blown away by it. It is a marvel to witness. And my parents enjoyed it, which I thought was interesting. Foxcatcher. Not only is this a Philadelphia-esque story, it's actually a little more local to where I live, in Chester County. This is a story that is very close to home in a state not that far from me where one of the DuPont heirs lived. And the son, he's actually one of the only direct descendants of one of the big DuPonts. And he, of course, died in prison about 15 years ago. He committed a murder of a boxing coach, and it was all over the news, particularly in my area in Pennsylvania in the 90s. And this is, Steve Carell, portraying that character, and Channing Tatum as the boxer protege because he basically tries to create, coach the men's Olympic boxing team and goes insane because he's a very off-kilter individual. So Steve Carell's most compelling performance, and he did, I believe, get a lot of Oscar love for this performance. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This was the last Marvel movie I needed to see to be all caught up before Agatha All Along came out. And obviously, I am not going to see... I don't know if I'll see the Marvels. We'll see. Maybe if I'm feeling like I have nothing else to watch. I love the Guardians trilogy. I watched the first two movies in 2023. Loved them. I think this one is a little weaker than the second, but it is still a strong film. I just love how wacky it is, how colorful it is. Just the characters, the mic drop, the needle drops. It works so well for what it is. It's my kind of superhero movie. Snowpiercer. Wow, this was a riveting film. Really, brilliantly absurd. Tilda Swinton is so commanding on screen in this film. She is just a tour de force. And of course, Chris Evans, one of his more serious roles. Bong Joon-ho, who directed Parasite, did this movie. And it's such an interesting premise, being trapped on a train that is going through an Arctic tundra that can never stop, because that's the only way that the fuel source that provides fuel for the people on the board, the train, can eat. And everyone in the front of the train is upper class, and as you move back, it's workers and then the poor, and the poor end up uprising. And it's violent, very gruesome, but such a riveting movie. Society of the Snow. This is another one I saw early in 2024, but it will always leave its mark on me. A very haunting film about a true story, a plane crash in Argentina. Oh, what a horrific ideal. It's amazing that so many of them did survive. It is a gnarly film, be warned, but very good, and I definitely recommend. Here we go, Poor Things. I would have probably had a lot more I did talk about Poor Things when I made my Oscars 2024 video. I went into it very skeptical about the framing of having a straight man make this kind of movie. After having watched it, I wasn't so worried about that. I don't know, the fantasy of it was compelling. I wasn't too weirded out by it. Was a very feminist story, and the way it ended I felt good about, even though it's a straight man directing it. I was like, this is good, he's making this kind of movie. The parts that were really raunchy were isolated to one section that, because I had been warned so much by everyone to be prepared for, I didn't find quite to be as pearl clutching as I feared they'd be. It was a little over the top, and I really would love to see more attractive individuals in such sexual positions, but that's not the point here. Emma Stone's going through it. So yes, I do think this was deserving for a Best Actress win. It's just a shame that it came at the expense of Lily Gladstone. That was really unfortunate. And also all the production design wins and everything. Totally on board with. Judas and the Black Messiah. Gotta watch this movie. A real story that not enough of us know about the intermachinations of the Black Panther Party. Um, that's all I'm going to say. I mean, it is extremely prescient. Came out a few years ago. I'd heard of it and I had bookmarked it. Finally got around to seeing it. Really compelling performances from the two lead males. Very, very important movie. Fellow Travelers, a limited series that I finally saw this year from last year. Matt Bomer and Jonathan Bailey. Beyond the fact that they're very nice to look at and they have a lot of sex scenes, this is a really well written, gripping story of two queer men's lives in the 20th century. The commentary on passing as a gay man in a heteronormative society for that type of social world that they were inhabiting in, particularly Matt Bomer's character, I found to be really interesting. I'd never quite seen something explore it that richly. And even the backup characters, there were comments on race, there were comments on lesbians in that time as well. It just touched on a lot of different things, obviously AIDS, and just politics in general, the Red Scare in the 1950s. I mean, it was a very beautiful way of weaving all these stories together. It ended up in Fire Island it was like a very long tapestry of these two men's lives woven together across many years. Very, very tragic, though. The Holdovers. What can I say? This is a classic. A movie that feels like it came out 25 years ago, 35 years ago, but it only came out last year. Paul Giamatti and Dominic Sessa are captivating. Divine Joy Randolph won the guest supporting actress for a reason. Yeah, it's a Christmas movie from here on out. I don't know when I'm going to see it next. I watched it in May. I watched this movie in May, which probably wasn't the right time of year to watch it, but that was the earliest when I subscribed to Peacock at that time was when I could finally watch it. It was the wrong time of year to watch it, but I should watch it during the holiday season. The Zone of Interest. Oh, what a intense slice of cinema. It's definitely one of those movies that I rank high that I know for a fact I never want to watch again. And I think most people feel that way about it because it's not necessarily meant to be an entertaining film. It's not a gross movie, but I think we all got that from the trailer. It's what they don't show that is more haunting. And the use of sound is so brilliant. I still love that it won Best Sound at the Oscars, one of the most inspired wins of modern Oscars history. It was a truly formidable project that is really haunting and harrowing and echoing through our modern times very, very strongly. Wicked. Yeah, what can I say? I have it at number 11. I had a great time with this. I had never seen the Broadway musical. I'd never listened to the soundtrack. And then the movie, it starts and I'm just like, what have I been missing? Ariana and Cynthia are perfect in their roles. I really would love both of them to take home supporting actress and lead actress. Unfortunately, I think especially for Cynthia, that's not looking as likely these days. We will see. There is still a chance this could win Best Picture. It is definitely, I think, in the top 3 that are currently competing. And so I will be very interested to see where that debate goes, because I know that there is a bit of a critic split on this one. The populace loves it. Critics are a little hit or miss, but generally it's got a lot of favorable critic reviews. I do just want to say, the lighting does not bother me. I feel like I'm the only person who does not care that much about the lighting. Do I feel like the film could be a little more saturated? Sure. I would probably prefer, and I would have probably done it that way. But it doesn't bother me that much. I feel like the lighting in particular doesn't bother me. The saturation maybe is the one thing, because I did rewatch The Wizard of Oz before, and I kind of saw the contrast, and it was a little glaring. Inside Out 2. I'd seen The Wizard of Oz years ago. That's why it's not on this list. I'd seen that already. That wasn't a first-time view. But it was the first time I'd seen it in a long time. Inside Out 2. what really will always stick out for me is the character of anxiety and the panic attack scene with Riley. Um, I was watching this really well-known critic. He put together a best of the year video that was tied into his countdown, and it had scenes from all of the big movies of the year. A lot of them were not Disney products or even DreamWorks products, but like they were like, more indie. But Inside Out 2 was missing, and I was just like, how can you celebrate 2024 in film without Inside Out 2? The critics, the snobby critics, because it's a Disney movie who want to dismiss this film, irritate the hell out of me. This is a phenomenal sequel to Inside Out. It's just a smidge worse than the first, and that's all we can ask for of the Pixar sequel these days. They expand the richness of the context of Riley's mind so cleverly, so authentically. Anxiety is the center point on the, juxtaposition with joy. Amy Poehler does a great job. I mean, as someone who suffers from panic attacks, I am going to be using the, way anxiety is depicted in my brain as a reminder when I'm having panic attacks about what's going on in my brain. Because it's really great to see that visualized. It helps you understand where your anxiety and fears are coming from. I feel like the film just does such a wonderful job at spotlighting that. Uh, I had a really, really good time with this one. What can I say? Baby Reindeer. This was a limited series on Netflix that came out of nowhere that had everyone raving. Talk about a series I never want to see again. This was really a depressing watch, but it was so well done. I have to give it its flowers. Jessica Gunning, my oh my. What a character. Now, there was a lot of controversy about the accuracy of the story. I don't know where the lawsuits have gone in that department yet. But all that aside, give it a watch. It's about a stalker and a man who is love-hating the relationship he has with his stalker. And it goes in a lot of directions you wouldn't expect. The Wild Robot. Wow, what a success this movie was. No one thought DreamWorks could reach this height again. This is kind of exciting. I saw The Wild Robot in theaters, and I'm so glad that I did. I almost didn't. I can't wait to watch it again. It's such a feel-good movie with beautiful animation, a creative concept that feels fresh. I know it was based on a book, so it's not entirely original, but feels original. My only critique is that I do feel that the robot the robot endangers so many of the animals when it first decides to fight against the abducting other robots that I'm kind of like, why are you doing this? You seem like a very self-sacrificing character who cares nothing more than to protect others. Why are you letting all these characters risk their lives for you? I didn't quite understand that. Just surrender. Like, the best thing you can do is just let these animals live in peace. If you leave, they will hopefully live in peace. Instead, a lot of them die. That was like one thing I was a little bit like, conflict, it didn't feel like it needed to arise. But the emotion and heart is so raw and palpable, and the animals are so warm and fuzzy. It's such a great animation, testament to animation. I do think it's still a pretty good lock to win Best Animated Film. But I don't know, Flow out of Latvia is giving it a run for its money, and they both have a similar animation style. I have not seen Flow yet, but it is on my list for this year. Shogun. I believe this is my highest ranked limited series of 2024. Yes, Shogun is that girl. That was a phenomenal bit of storytelling. Now, it is actually apparently no longer a limited series. There is going to be a season 2, but Letterboxd didn't know that when the show first came out. So that's why it is rankable on Letterboxd, and so I have it on here. But if you haven't watched it, it's on Hulu. A Japanese epic with some Western actors introduced, because it's about a British man who washes ashore with his ship in Japan, and I believe it's in 17th century. Yeah. And so the civil unrest that's going on in the country at the time, and someone from the West is really interested to see that kind of period piece. I never watched a Japanese period piece before. It's very epic, very gruesome, but so beautiful. Really great homage to Japan's history, although Japan has a very violent history, but so do all empires. And cultures. So yes, definitely deserving of all the awards that it has been showered with this year. Nosferatu is my most recently watched theatrical release on here. I watched it 2 days after Christmas. Merry Christmas, y'all. I gotta be honest with you, after seeing The Lighthouse, I was scared. I was like, should I be watching this in a movie theater on a huge screen with loud sounds? My brother was with me. I was like, Peter, I am worried. I am worried. Ultimately, I was perhaps over prepared because I had heard that it was going to be so gnarly. I expected it to be more gruesome. It was not as, intense as I thought it was going to be. I'll be honest with you, I did get a smidge sleepy towards the middle. But I think that was just the day. I think it was just the day. The movie it builds really well at the beginning, and then it sort of flatlines. It sort of flatlines for a little bit and picks up at the end. But I think on a second viewing, knowing the structure of the film, I'll be able to sort of sit through that flatlining portion a little better. Because there's just so much to feast your eyes on in this film. The cinematography is just divine. As a lover of gothic horror, as a lover of haunted castle stuff, I had such goosebumps the whole time. I mean, it is definitely a little style over substance, but it's the kind of style that's so damn good. I just can't knock the story for maybe some issues that it has, or maybe the fact that it's not the most revolutionary telling of this story. It could have definitely been done a slightly more unique way. What is unique is Robert Eggers' framing as a cinema art, an artiste, and the research into the dialects and the way people speak. Obviously, it's meant to be set in Germany in the 1800s, and everyone has a British accent, so that's a little like, come on, we could have worked on that a little bit. But Nosferatu has a very Eastern European accent. It's brilliant. Bill Skarsgård is brilliant in this. And the Romani people, the people of Romania that he encounters, are speaking a dialect that is very accurate to that time and region. So the research was still done for the places that it could be in that regard. I guess I can understand they were using mostly British actors. Why not just have them speak in their native accents? But whatever. That's one thing I would have done differently. I would have had them all either speak German or speak English with a German accent to make it a little more believable. But yeah, all in all, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I was just so excited for this movie. I'm not even huge into vampires, but I think it's just the haunting atmosphere of a story like this that I just can't resist. It's right up my alley. This kind of gothic stuff is just this Edgar Allan Poe stuff is just really, really chef's kiss. Black Swan. Speaking of a horror film that did really well with the Oscars in 2010 or 2011, I saw this for the first time. Natalie Portman knocks it out of the park. If you've seen it, I recommend it. As someone who really reveres ballet, I was very aesthetically drawn into the story for that alone, but it's such a great commentary on, it's very much the substance before the substance came about. I can't talk more about the substance because it's the next time I do this. I watch the substance after New Year's. It'll be in my 2025 video. The Truman Show. Oh my God, I can't believe I never watched this until this year. About a man who is kept in an environment that is completely fictional, and he doesn't realize it until he finds out he's on a TV show. Ariana Grande references some of the imagery on her Eternal Sunshine album and the Yes and music video. This was a true delight to watch. At first, when I started watching it, I was like, oh, okay, this will be all right. It'll be one of those highly critically rated films that I'm like, on. By the end, I was like, I see why this is considered one of the greatest films of all time, particularly of the 90s. I totally get it. It's a movie that when he breaks free from that environment, you're just like, this is such a pinnacle movie. This is a triumph of a movie. Dune Part 2, I'm going to spoil it by saying this is the highest 2024 film. We have reached the top three. Dune Part 2 is that movie. What can I say? I recently rewatched it. I will be honest with you, I was a little more impressed upon my first viewing than my second, but I still hold that this is the best 2024 movie that I have yet seen. Keep in mind, there are tons of 2024 movies that I have yet to see. Obviously, they would have been on this list if they had been. So I'll be very interested to see films like, Conclave, The Brutalist, Honora. But as of right now, Dune Part 2 is taking the crown. It's unfortunate that I think the fact that it came out in March is going to make it difficult for it to get as much Oscar love as it should. But what, again, a triumph. A very, well-researched adaptation that not since The Lord of the Rings, I think we have seen from a franchise IP like this, from a big studio. All right, so my top two films are both from almost a decade ago. I had a really hard time placing them. They could go in either order. I ultimately went with, at number 2, United 93. This is a movie I had bookmarked for a long time, but hadn't been able to see for at least a couple years until it came to a streaming service I had, or came on free. I can't remember where I watched it. This is a movie detailing the hijack of Flight 93 out of Newark Airport in 9/11. And it is specifically about the control towers at Newark Airport, dealing with all the planes going missing, but particularly this one. And of course, the passengers. And it's the kind of movie that you never want to watch again. But you just have to sit after it's finished and just sort of process for a long time. It's a heavy watch because it is so realistic. It's so well acted. It's a little too real, perhaps, at points, because they actually had legit people who worked on the flight control towers at the time reprise those positions for the film. Whew. Yeah, this is something I recommend, but as a one-time view, that it's just, I don't know. It's sort of just a memorial to those people who died, and that was so long ago, and I'd never seen this movie's from 2006. It interestingly did not get a lot of Oscar attention at the Oscars, which I think is bizarre. But yeah. Whew. And then at number 1, I have Atonement. I can't believe I never watched this movie until this year, but that's how it goes. I've been really trying to go back and fill in the gaps, at least for the 21st century. Still got a lot of work to do pre-2000. Of all these award contenders, Keira Knightley and James McAvoy, I'm going to be honest with you, it might be the score that is why this film is dragged all the way up to number 1. I mean, the cinematography and performances are excellent. This is definitely a top 20 film. But number 1, I think the score is what really elevates it. The Elegy at Dunkirk motif, when I listened to the soundtrack after I saw the movie, and of course during watching the movie, just emotions that very few movies have ever to bring out in me. It was so emotionally resonant seeing the way that Dunkirk was presented in the portion of the film that is very much dealing with World War II. Half the film is sort of this romance in this Hampshire, this estate in England. And then the other half is James McAvoy's character in France. And it's a romance. It's a romance that could never be. It's so sappy in some ways, but I mean, it is just so gripping and so monumental. The performances are all exquisite. Saoirse Ronan plays a 12-year-old who is the most precocious, nosy little B word who, if you've seen the movie, you just are like, you ruined everything. Yeah. I love Saoirse Ronan, but she really, is the villain of the film. I don't want to spoil too much. Please check it out if you are into dramatic, epic, sweeping romance movies with gorgeous cinematography. There's a scene where they're playing in a fountain by the house at the beginning that I just was watching and I was like, this is just the pinnacle of artistic cinema for me. I don't know why. I was just, as I was watching it, there were just so many shots that I just felt like were like the best, most beautiful paintings that film could ever become. If that makes any sense. I've been rambling for way too long. I'm going to wrap this up. That's it's what number one. Like I said, Dune 2 wins for 2024. I think my highest rated 2023 is going to Zone of Interest. I could go back further. But yes, if you want to see this list for yourself, it'll be on my Letterboxd, which I will link, along with my current 2024 ranking as it stands. I have currently seen over 50 2024 movies and limited series. I still got a lot more to see, so I will continue to fill in those gaps as the year progresses. And of course, I have lists ranking 2023 all the way back to 1993, individually ranking all the movies I've seen from those years in order. So if you're interested in seeing my rankings for all those years, that'll be in the Letterboxd lists I have on there. So thank you all so much for watching. Let me know if any of these movies you agreed with, what your favorite first-time watches of 2024 were, what are your favorite movies of 2024, what are some of your least favorites. Have any of you seen The Ghosts of Orley Rectory? And so I hope you all enjoy this. And like I said, I might be back to do this actually a lot sooner than 12 months from now. I might just do this 6 months from now, because it's easier for me to recall the movies. Plus it's not quite as long of a video. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed new year. I'll see you all in the next video. Peace, love, and light. Bye.